subscribe, like the video, and, if possible, join Patreon. But if you don't have much money, you can support the channel by watching the novels on euroaudiobooks.com. Remember that you can participate in the polls so that your favorite novel gets published for free.
Chapter 101 is coming. It's coming. Tokyo Air Force Base Command Headquarters. Commander Okamura, the non-commissioned officer, and a security guard communicator, all three of them in the room were extremely nervous and held their breath, as if they were trying to deceive the enemy, not even daring to breathe. In this oppressive and suffocating atmosphere, the footsteps in the corridor were getting closer and closer, clear and audible, hitting their hearts hard. Tap, tap. The footsteps stopped outside the door, and then a tall, dark red figure rushed out. The moment it appeared, the room was suddenly filled with murderous intent and bloody odor. Commander Okamura has achieved his current glorious military position after going through countless file-size battles and crawling out of the dead man pile countless times. But at this moment, he still gasped, his hair stood on end, and he couldn't help but back away with his back against the wall, suppressing the urge to escape from here at all costs. The enemy standing at the door could not be simply described as a human. It was clearly a humanoid monster. Its slender scarlet eyes were cold and indifferent. Its tough, dark, keratinized skin was stained with blood. Its perfect muscle contours showed a dangerous aura of wildness and strength. Its clenched fists each extended with sharp, dark claws like a wolf's. Such a humanoid monster slowly walked into the room, and the biological aura full of killing and brutal aesthetics made people have no desire to fight against it. Just like the bird, see the falcon. The difference between the two is as much as several levels of biological pyramids. It's here as expected. The devilish humanoid monster grinned and spoke fluent Japanese in a hoarse voice, his scarlet eyes fixed on Commander Okamura in the room. Commander Okamura gasped in astonishment, propped up his hands on the desk to hide his weak legs, and asked in horror, "What kind of monster are you?" "Commander, didn't you send 7 fighter planes here to kill me?" The humanoid monster smiled humanely, exited the integrated form that was fully covered with venom, and revealed the handsome face of a young man. The tough keratin membrane on his body was transformed into a leather night battle suit as the black liquid flowed linearly. "It's you, Kyle from the United States." Commander Okamura looked incredulous, staring blankly at Kyle, who had returned to his normal appearance and clothes. A few hours ago, after active discussions, risen officials and the military decided that the Air Force would launch an attack as soon as the target entered the airspace over Tokyo, thus severely dampening the morale of the U.S. empire. As a result, not only did the 7 Purple Lightning fighters fail to annihilate the enemy, but the enemy came directly to the door and forcibly broke into the Air Force Base. Commander Okamura forced himself to accept the horrifying fact at the moment, trembling all over and not knowing what to say. This is too unreasonable. Pity. Germany, which had withdrawn from the battlefield of World War II, had no time to remind Rizang, "Be careful of Kyle." After all, Kyle is such an unreasonable person. He will never be unreasonable if he wants to take action, and he will never admit defeat if he wants to face off head-on. His existence represents the word powerful. The 7 Purple Lightning fighters couldn't defeat him, so they were all dismantled and destroyed. The Hydra base factory with more powerful weapons and the German military base with much more soldiers stationed, they were all conquered by him. How could the Rizang Air Force Base stop them? Superman's physique is 12 times that of a human, plus hundreds of combat techniques, as well as venom skin protection and special weapons. Ordinary soldiers are simply too vulnerable in front of Kyle. No matter how hard the Japanese soldiers resisted, and how fearless they were nothing but chickens and dogs in the face of the absolute, overwhelming power gap, and could not withstand a single blow. "Commander." Kyle looked at Commander Okamura indifferently and said meaningfully, "I really want to see what you call the Bushido spirit, so I came here as invited." Commander Okamura's face turned pale with anger and shock, but soon he sighed heavily and took down the exquisite short sword made of steel that looked like a work of art from the wall next to him where the red Japanese flag was hung. The non-commissioned officers and the communicators all prostrated themselves on the ground with their heads down, not daring to speak out to persuade them. Under Kyle's oppressive gaze, Commander Okamura knelt on the ground dejectedly, holding the coldly shining sword in his backhand. Finally, he gritted his teeth and stabbed the sword into his abdomen. He groaned in pain, fell to the ground, and blood gushed out along the blade like a fountain. In Commander Okamura's view, he had provoked an enemy that he should not have provoked, and he could not escape blame for the fall of the Tokyo Air Force Base. To die by seppuku, which is highly respected in Bushido, is an honorable sacrifice. Kyle looked at the Air Force commander lying in a pool of blood with an indifferent expression, as if he was looking at an ant ending his humble life. Razang is somewhat similar to a country in his previous life. One of the most offensive things is their arrogance and self-righteousness, and their advocacy of the Bushido spirit, thinking they are superior to others. Kyle felt that since this was a rare opportunity, it was necessary to teach Razang a lesson on what it meant to be truly strong and invincible. "I won't kill you." Kyle glanced at the NCO and the communicator on the ground and said in a commanding tone, "Take the commander's body away and tell your emperor that I will come to visit you soon." The non-commissioned officer and the communicator breathed a sigh of relief, and they quickly stepped forward, each holding Commander Okamura's hands and feet, and evacuated the office in 2 steps at a time. "By the way, take this." Kyle suddenly remembered something, and with a wave of his hand, a card was firmly nailed to the commander's chest. On the back of the card was a black image of a grinning devil. It is not the national emblem of the United States, nor is it the symbol of the U.S. military. It is just a demon card that represents its own position. He wanted to shake and force the entire Razang kingdom by himself. This statement was never meant as a joke, but was about to become a reality recorded in history. After the 2 Japanese soldiers left with the bodies, Kyle left the commander's office. At this moment, the base outside was ablaze with flames rising to the sky, and countless buildings were burning. The fire was about to extend to the command building inside the base. On the vast ground, the bodies and remains of countless soldiers were also devoured by the flames. The blood and fire reflected each other, burning the night sky red and tragically. The main Air Force base was in ruins, as if it had been hit by a disaster. The Soviet Union has a saying that is very appropriate to describe Kyle. Wherever he goes, he is accompanied by war, disaster, and death. He is the apostle of hell, the embodiment of the devil, and a hero in the eyes of others. Kyle quickened his pace, passing quickly between the burned-down buildings and approaching the apron at the end of the Air Force Base. Many of the excellent Japanese fighter planes parked there have reached the blue grade, and it would be a shame not to take them away as well. According to his usual style of action, as long as he keeps the habit of collecting spoils on the battlefield, he will always make a profit. Chapter 102, It's Really Coming. It was late at night, almost the next morning. A raging fire suddenly broke out at the Razang Air Force Base, spreading outward with no sign of stopping. By the time the rescue team reacted and began to put out the fire and rescue people, the fire had spread to an area of several kilometers in radius centered on the base. That night, countless people living in Tokyo were awakened by the noise. Looking outside their homes, they could see flames rising into the sky no matter how far or near they were. The night sky was burned red like blood by the flames. It was as if the sky was angry and was about to bring down divine punishment. At the emperor's residence, the current emperor after World War II was naturally awakened by his subordinates. Confusedly, he climbed up from his tacky bed, changed into a noble day-dress robe with sleepy eyes, and arrived at the conference hall in a hurry. When he arrived at the meeting hall with a dazed mind, he saw the bright fire on the edge of the night sky in the yard outside the door. He listened to the frontline reports of the main Air Force Base by a group of senior officials. He was completely awake with shaking shock. The emperor seemed to doubt his life. He leaned against the door, turned his head and looked at an officer who was bowing his head in silence, and asked loudly, "What did you say?" "Say it again." The officer replied with a trembling voice, "Your Majesty, the main Air Force Base was attacked by the American Kyle just now, and now it has completely fallen into a sea of fire. Now all the firefighting teams in Tokyo have been assembled to prevent the fire from spreading. American Kyle? Is he a monster? How could one person invade the Air Force headquarters base?" The emperor muttered to himself in disbelief. According to the surviving communicator at the base, he is most likely the incarnation of a monster. Bullets have no effect on him, and artillery bombardment cannot kill him. Our soldiers will be easily killed in one encounter. The officer gritted his teeth and took out a bloody devil card from his pocket. He forced Commander Okamura to commit seppuku in the main Air Force base, leaving behind this devil card, and also said. The Emperor saw the officer's hesitant expression and couldn't help but ask, "What else did you say?" He said that he would come to visit His Majesty the Emperor soon to ask for more advice on Bushido. As soon as the officer finished speaking, the faces of the senior officials in the hall changed. The Emperor leaned against the door with a gloomy face. If his subordinates had not stepped forward to support him, he would have almost sat on the floor. "Your Majesty, calm down. You are the god of a country. How can you be afraid of a mere invader in your own territory?" The subordinate who supported the Emperor reminded in a low voice. That's right, that's right." The Emperor nodded quickly, forcing himself to calm down. He looked at the cabinet officials and warlord officers in the hall with dignity and asked, "What do you think? How should we deal with the invading lunatics from the United States?" The warlord's representative, Commander Sasaki, who controls the Rizang Army headquarters, snorted coldly and spoke first. "What do you mean by unkillable? Most of the time, it's just an excuse for the surviving soldiers to cover up their own poor defense and demonize the invaders." He said coldly and ruthlessly, "Your Majesty, I suggest mobilizing half of the armed forces stationed in Tokyo to conduct a detailed search throughout Japan and Tokyo. If we find American Kyle, we will encircle and kill him on the spot." The representative of the cabinet, Prime Minister Tanaka, lowered his eyebrows and echoed, "That's right. We are a country of samurai. No matter how strong a person is, how can he be stronger than our samurai? While the armed forces are searching all of Tokyo, it would be best for His Majesty the Emperor to hold a meeting tomorrow to personally appease the ordinary people of Tokyo and make them believe that we have the ability and confidence to kill the invaders," Commander Sasaki added. "As for the news that the air base was invaded and captured, even if the people of Tokyo know about it, we can only control it within the boundaries of Tokyo and never let it spread out to let the enemy laugh at us." The two big men who hold real power in the country have spoken, and of course the rest of the senior officials agree. The Emperor secretly cursed the old fox, but he could only superficially agree. Tonight is destined to be a sleepless night for everyone in Rizang, Tokyo. And this is just the beginning of the show. The real show is yet to begin. The next morning, American Kyle attacked the main Air Force base and destroyed it to a scorched earth. This information was so important that it was like throwing a mine into a fish pond. No matter how much the top leaders tried to control and appease the public, the related remarks and information still spread like wildfire. Unkillable monster, American devil, the warmongerer who dominates Germany. Within a few hours, almost everyone in Tokyo was discussing this topic in panic, and the name May D. Kyle lingered in everyone's mind like a nightmare fog. The Emperor was forced to appear in the Imperial Palace, where the military force had been increased fivefold, and give a speech in the name of God, declaring that the invaders would be dealt with as soon as possible in order to forcibly appease the emotions of the people of Tokyo. Ordinary people were terrified, and armed soldiers carefully searched the whole city. On the other hand, some of the self-important samurai Ronin in Rizang were ready to make a move and excitedly rushed to Tokyo, hoping to take this opportunity to kill Kyle and become famous in one battle. At the same time, the main dojo of the Shinto Muninryu School in Kuranami-ku, Tokyo, Kyle, who was slightly disguised as Venom, stopped on the road in front of the gym and looked up. The swordplay gym in front of us covers a wide area, with more than a dozen buildings with Rizang characteristics stacked up one after another. The main hall is as large as a modern gymnasium and can accommodate nearly 1,000 people to study swordplay together. Kyle stood tall on the road, glancing coldly at the magnificent sword school gym with a faint smile on his lips. The Bushido of Risen. It is unclear when it originated, but it was during the Edo period when the shogunate recruited samurai, and the spirit was highly respected by the samurai. The warriors of Rizang specialized in kendo, the art of killing. Although the shogunate was later overthrown and the new policy issued an order to ban swords, the subsequent samurai of Rizang still advocated the practice of swordsmanship. They believed that kendo was suitable for samurai and a strong samurai could be invincible. This situation has continued to this day. Dozens of different kendo schools have been passed down, and most of them are located in Tokyo, the most prosperous city in Japan. When Japanese soldiers were young, they were also taught in kendo gyms. In a sense, these kendo schools are the authoritative cornerstones of Bushido and the spiritual pillars that support the Japanese warrior's self-esteem. The emperor, the risen high-ranking officials, and the armed soldiers at the military base were all cautious and careful to guard against surprise attacks. Unexpectedly, Kyle's target was temporarily shifted. He will first trample and destroy the foundation of Rizang's Bushido. Kyle took a confident step forward, and the Rizang passerby clothes on his body began to change, transforming back into a cool and dark night suit, and walked towards the main entrance of the kendo gym with determination and strength. Chapter 103, Sword Master? The Sword Hall is not open to the public recently. Please don't approach casually. Who? Do you have an invitation? As Kyle approached the grand front door of the kendo gym, his black battle suit was particularly conspicuous. The two young men guarding the door, wearing white kimonos and equipped with wooden swords, both stepped forward, stretched out their hands to intercept him, and spoke out in alert. Tell your owner. Kyle smiled faintly, walked up the stairs without stopping, and said calmly, just say it. American Kyle, come to challenge. American Kyle? The two young men gasped and looked at each other, their faces filled with horror. After all, it was just one night, and the whole of Tokyo was like a magnitude 10 earthquake, causing panic among the whole country as if they were facing a great enemy, the man who was said to be a devil. The Emperor of Rizang publicly condemned his crime last night in his palace, and countless armed soldiers were conducting a comprehensive search in the urban area of Tokyo. As a result, such an uninvited guest came to their sword school. Kyle kept his pace unhurried. Every time he took a step forward, the two young guards took a few steps back. When he reached the main entrance, the guards had already rushed into the gym in panic, shouting as they walked, "It's Kyle from America! He's here! The demon who destroyed the air base and threatened the Emperor last night has come to us. Someone come quickly!" In just a short while, dozens of young men dressed as swordsmen rushed out of the dojo, holding sharp swords in their hands and wearing wooden clogs. But when they rushed to within 3 meters of Kyle, they all stopped in their tracks, their faces solemn and vigilant, not daring to move forward, holding swords and keeping a safe distance. Kyle didn't even glance at them. He walked in calmly and indifferently. He moved like this among the people holding swords and soon stepped into the main hall of the main gym. More and more sword-fighting disciples gathered around, from dozens to hundreds, surrounding Kyle from inside and outside, but no one took action. Fortunately, the hall of the dojo is spacious enough to accommodate hundreds of people studying swordsmanship at the same time. The wooden floor is as smooth as new, and the inner walls are equipped with racks for practicing wooden swords. In the middle is a huge plaque written in ink. Shinto Munin School, as one of the cornerstones of Bushido today, the Shinto Munin Ryu, which masters high-end swordsmanship, can be ranked in the top 10 among the kendo schools handed down by Rizang. Although it is not the strongest in the industry, it is the most authoritative kendo school with the largest number of disciples. During this war, all the people in the gym are inner disciples, and there are hundreds of them. Please move aside and let the challenging guest in. Surrounded by a group of people, Kyle walked into the hall of the gym. Before he could take a closer look at the interior, an old but powerful voice was heard in the hall. Upon hearing this, hundreds of sword-fighting disciples dressed in uniform, white kimonos dispersed respectfully and silently, making way for a spacious and ample space. At this time, Kyle finally saw the scene inside clearly. He could see an old man in a kendo uniform sitting in the middle of the main hall, and a beautiful woman in a kimono kneeling beside him. Are you the current master of the Shinto Munin School's sword gym? Kyle looked down with an obviously disappointed expression, which made the hundreds of sword disciples around him look angry. This invader is really too rampant. Everyone in Rizang Dongjing knows the sword master, who is old but not weak, a master of swordsmanship. Even if 10 adult youths come forward, They will be easily knocked down by him with his wooden swords. Sir, you have come from afar. Is it really for the challenge? Old Jin asked softly without any anger, with the demeanor of a master who has practiced cultivation. It's very simple. I will wipe out the name of your Shinto Wunyan school today. Of course, you are just the first one. There are more than 40 kendo schools representing Bushido in Rizang, Tokyo, and I will eliminate them too. Kyle shrugged, as if he was going to do something very easy and ordinary. The guest has a murderous aura and speaks in a rather arrogant tone. Old Jin waved his hand. The woman next to him understood what he meant. She stood up gracefully and took down a scabbard-covered sword from the shelf under the plaque and handed it to him. Kyle did not stop him. He really wanted to see the level of swordsmanship that Rizang admired and passed down. The old sword master stood up leisurely, unsheathed his sharp sword, flashing with cold light, and pointed it at Kyle. You are an outsider who invaded our country and challenged the gym. First you threatened the emperor, and now you want to destroy the sword school that has been passed down for hundreds of years. Now that you are here, don't even think about leaving. Kyle seemed to have not heard the threat. He glanced at the hundreds of swordsmanship disciples around him and suggested, "Why don't you all come together?" The old swordman paused, holding the hilt of the sword tightly with both hands. His narrow and deep eyes were filled with cold light. You underestimate me? Kyle shook his head and explained, I don't just look down on you. I look down on everyone present. As soon as these words came out, hundreds of sword-fighting disciples in the hall were so angry that they almost rushed over with swords in hand. The reason they didn't rush out was that Jian Lao couldn't help but take action. I saw old Jian sprinting forward. His speed was faster than that of a healthy young man. When he was 3 meters in front of Kyle, he leaped up. He was in the air, with both hands raised back to gather strength, and swung the sword down fiercely. The sharp blade drew a semicircular arc, trying to cut Kyle in half from the top of his head down. The old sword master's speed was too fast, and the smooth movement of swinging the sword was clean and neat, which made all the disciples in the hall exclaim excitedly. And the woman in kimono also smiled. That's true. Kyle didn't move, as if frightened by the swordsmanship attack from Master Jian, and had no intention of avoiding the chopping sword. The sword-fighting disciples could almost imagine in their minds the bloody scene of the opponent's body being symmetrically split into 2 halves, with internal organs and blood spilling all over the ground. Under everyone's expectant gaze, Jian Lao's sword slashed with a cold afterimage. At the moment when it was about to touch his body, Kyle raised his right hand like lightning, holding the tip of the sword with his thumb and index finger. The sword landed on the right palm, protected by the vibranium arm guard and venom leather jacket without making any sound. The slash that was so sharp a second ago suddenly stopped steadily and inexplicably. Fighting against swords with bare hands? No, this is a scene of supernatural power that surpasses thousands of skills. The sword-fighting disciples were all stunned. The hall of the gym was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. What was even more shocking was old Jian at this moment. He looked in disbelief at the right hand that caught his sword and gripped the hilt tightly in shame, anger, and fear. He used all his strength, but still couldn't pull the sword out of Kyle's hand. How did you do that? Jian Lao let go of his sword in shock. You know, he has practiced high-speed slashing for decades, and he can easily cut through a tree as big as a wrist. A frog in a well, Kyle said indifferently in Japanese. He already knew from this distance that the so-called sword master only had a rare green ability card of mastery of true Shinto, thoughtless sword art. It's my turn, Kyle whispered, and punched forward with his left fist. The tip of his fist, with a whistling wind pressure, landed swiftly on the slightly thin body of the old swordsman. 12 times the strength of a human. Bang! As if being hit by a high-speed car, Jian Lao flew out like a kite with its string dropped, his body tumbling in a parabola across the hall, and fell heavily on the school's plaque 10 meters away. Chapter 104 Devil Card Baji. The school's plaque on the inner wall of the gym was stained with large patches of bright red blood, and Jian Lao's body, which had suffered fatal injuries, fell to the ground with no signs of life. The hall was dead silent. Hundreds of sword-fighting disciples opened their mouths in horror. Sadness, anger, hatred, shock, and fear were all reflected on their faces. Kyle had an indifferent expression. He calmly withdrew his clenched left fist, while the fingers of his right hand, which was wearing a vibranium arm guard, still held the tip of the katana. All skills are of low quality, only the variation is high. The evolutionary branches of this world are so confusing. In a situation where his strength, speed, nerve reaction, and physical strength are all surpassed and crushed, even if your swordsmanship is unparalleled and you have no strange energy, how can you withstand his full-strength punch after his genetic mutation and enhancement with your body as an ordinary person? Only the hidden magic and talents of alien races in the world and the future black technology products after the 21st century may be able to surpass his current progress in mutation and evolution. The Ancient One's wizard organization aims to protect the Earth. The Black Panther Nation is law-abiding and secluded from the world. The invasion deadline for outer space races and gods has not yet arrived, and the 21st century is still more than 50 years away. When there is no tiger in the mountain, the monkey becomes king. During World War II, Kyle dared to walk sideways with disdain. Anyone who disagrees can come and fight. Inside the hall of the gym, the woman in kimono stared blankly at the tragic death of the old swordsman. Her beautiful eyes filled with hatred and resentment. She suddenly snatched the sword from the hand of a swordsmanship disciple beside her and rushed towards Kyle like a madman, losing her composure. Kyle turned around indifferently, flicked his right wrist slightly, and threw the sword in his hand out with a swoosh sound, piercing through the woman's chest at high speed. The hilt of the sword went straight into the woman's body, dragging her back until she was nailed to the door of the hall and died. Master Jin, Senior Sister, the hundreds of remaining sword disciples in the gym were horrified and could no longer hold back their grief and anger. They rushed towards Kyle in the middle of the hall, swords in hand and shouting, "It would have been better if we got up earlier." Kyle shrugged indifferently. The liquid black silk of the Venom suit formed a protective hood on his neck. His cold and scarlet eyes flashed like a mask, and his clenched fists extended dark claws outward. Fully covered in venom, claw mode, Kyle squatted down, gathered some strength, and sprinted forward, his body rushing forward like a body of steel. Hundreds of young men with swords rushed over, and they were violently and savagely dispersed. The first few people who rushed in the front were knocked back and flew out of the door with blood spitting out of their mouths. His feet accelerated, and he sprinted forward with great force. Kyle's claws slashed and scratched without stopping. Every strike caused blood to splatter, and several young men fell to the ground wailing. The swordsmanship disciples attacked fearlessly, and most of their blows fell on him, failing to break the Venom suit's tough, protective outer layer. Even though the powerful sword strike barely broke through the Venom suit, leaving a long bloody mark on the skin underneath, the minor wound healed completely before the blood could spill out. It didn't look like hundreds of people besieging one person, but more like a lion or tiger breaking into a flock of sheep. Kyle transformed into a war machine called Killing, constantly harvesting weak lives. When the gym hall fell into a long silence again, Kyle took a deep breath and walked out to the courtyard with bloody footprints. The bright sunlight fell on his devilish red and dark appearance, and it became cold and gloomy again. Venom quickly disguised himself as Razang's common clothes and returned to his identity as a passerby, leaving the sword school gym filled with the smell of blood and fuel in a casual and natural manner. 3 minutes later, the main gymnasium of the Shinto Wunyan sword sect suddenly caught fire. The fire was severe and spread uncontrollably to more than a dozen other gymnasium buildings within the sect. The raging flames devoured everything in the sword school's gym, as well as the hundreds of years of history of the Shinto Wunyan Sword School's foundation. Tokyo, the Imperial Palace. The emperor, dressed in gorgeous and noble robes, was sitting on the altar in his palace, delivering speeches and statements to nearly 1,000 people in the gate courtyard. His face was majestic and full of peace under the backdrop of his robe. He looked down at the people with nobility like a god. The devil from the United States took advantage of the empty air base and committed a heinous crime, but he will soon be punished by the military warriors who are protected by the gods. Everyone should believe in us. We have the ability and confidence. Seeing that the people below had unshakable faith in this god of his, the emperor maintained a faint smile. Just as he was about to finish the rest of his speech, one of his subordinates suddenly walked onto the altar, causing him to pause. The emperor frowned in displeasure, but when his subordinates approached him and whispered a few words hurriedly in his ear, his face changed color with horror. Well, that's it for today. The emperor looked pale, and he casually said a few words to deal with it, then left the altar with the help of his men. Under the shrine, the people who were listening with great interest and in a relaxed mood were slightly stunned. They looked at each other and started talking, not knowing what had happened. Were all the Shinto Wunyan Sword School gyms really destroyed in a fire? Returning to the inner room of the emperor's residence, the emperor took a deep breath and asked with difficulty. The fire started and spread so quickly that when the fire brigade arrived, more than a dozen gym buildings had already been burned down. We only found this thing at the scene, the subordinate said, slowly pulling out a card from his pocket. The black devil on the card was grinning at the outside. The emperor looked at the card and could no longer remain calm, so he knelt on the ground. He took the devil card from his subordinate with fear and took out a card with the same devil pattern on the back from his own body. The two demon cards have the same format and pattern and appear to be made of iron metal, so they were not burned in the fire. The patterns on the front of the devil card are a square brick and a plum blossom. He is declaring war on our country on his own. Does he want to play all 54 cards? The emperor said, gritting his teeth. Your Majesty the Emperor. The subordinate sighed. Go and inform Commander Sasaki to allow all the armed forces left in Rizang, Tokyo, to go out. Make sure to fight back. The emperor quietly clenched his fists and made a decision in a cold voice. Also, let the ninja organization that protects the emperor's palace take action. My safety is second, and killing that man is the first goal. Your Majesty, you absolutely cannot do this. Your safety is the top priority, the subordinates advised. The emperor shook his head and said, no need to say more. When he plays all 54 cards, our Rasanda kingdom will cease to exist. What's the point of having an emperor and God? His purpose, actually, the subordinate hesitated and did not continue. We are a powerful warrior nation. How can we bow to him alone? The emperor glared at him, waved his long sleeves, and said firmly. At this time, in Jiangxia District, Tokyo, Rizang, in front of the main hall of the Wuzuhexen Sword School, Kyle strode forward, his dark battle suit revealed as before. He faced the guards at the door and rushed in. I'm Kyle, come to challenge me. Chapter 105. Ninja Organization within half a day. 11 sword school gyms in Tokyo, Rizang were destroyed. Each school's gym was broken into by the same person, who killed the gym owner and all the sword disciples inside, and then burned down the school's foundation. A devil card is left in each place, as if to indicate the identity of the intruder. Devil Kyle. He was like the devil incarnate, crushing and flattening the representative schools that were the cornerstone of Bushido and trampling on the spiritual pillars of the samurai. The people of Tokyo were once again shocked. They were frightened by the invader Kyle and realized for the first time that the warriors who were usually so skilled could be so fragile. Nearly 100,000 armed soldiers went out in an all-out search, but Tokyo was too big to be divided into 4 or 5 large cities, with dozens of famous sword schools and gyms scattered across various areas, making it impossible to deploy all the military forces for defense. Rizang strategic analysis experts figured out Kyle's whereabouts and goals and arranged for the army to lurk near these gyms in advance. The next moment, a gym of a school 10 kilometers away was destroyed. By the time the army arrived at the scene, all that was left of the gym was a desolate, bleak pile of charcoal. Little did they know that with the Blue Eagle conducting reconnaissance at an altitude of over 1,000 meters, it would be difficult for Kyle to be surrounded by a large army. After all, humans are not machines. When Kyle is in combat mode, he consumes much more physical energy than ordinary people. However, with the super soldier's physical fitness and self-healing factor, his physical condition can be restored quickly. However, Once he is trapped in a large army that has been armed and prepared, no matter how strong he is, he will not be able to completely wipe out the enemy by himself. He will consume a lot of physical energy in the long-lasting stalemate and will have no time to relax and rest. Furthermore, continuous and intensive artillery attacks will exceed the limits of the venom protection and the resistance of the mutated body. The healing speed of the self-healing factor cannot keep up with the new injuries, and there is also the possibility of death. Kyle has enough knowledge of his own strength, so he will not put himself in a life-threatening situation. While playing hide-and-seek with the large army in Tokyo, he successfully destroyed 5 sword school gyms that had gaps in their defenses, adding up to a total of 16 schools. Rizang lost so many schools of tradition at once, and the last time was 100 years ago in the Edo period. One can imagine how much of a blow this was to people who were proud of being samurai. Commander Sasaki at the command center was anxious and sent messengers to the remaining gyms of each school, persuading them to abandon the main gym and leave to seek refuge in safe areas. Yes, evacuate. In the eyes of the country, Kyle's threat is no less than that of a natural disaster. However, as the representative schools of Bushido, all the dojos rejected Commander Sasaki's advice. For them, facing a powerful enemy coming to challenge them, death is not a big deal. What is scary is to be afraid before the battle. If they abandon the main gym out of fear, wouldn't that mean they are abandoning the Bushido spirit in their hearts? As long as the sword is there, the man is there, and the man is there. This was the unanimous response from the remaining gym members, a statement that they considered to be very courageous. When Commander Sasaki learned about this at the military headquarters, he almost burst into a rant. For the first time, he sighed in his heart. Bushido is harmful. It's too old-fashioned and stupid. It doesn't know how to adapt. The enemy is other people, so it's okay if there is a possibility of defeating them. But that was Kyle. In less than 2 days, the name of the devil enveloped and suppressed the entire risen Tokyo. Do we really have to wait until the last few schools and gyms in Tokyo are destroyed before we can concentrate our troops to arrange defenses? Commander Sasaki had a headache. As he was pondering over what to do, a communications soldier rushed in excitedly. The communications soldier saluted and said, "Report to the commander. We just received the latest news. The ninja organization that protects the emperor has left the imperial palace and is secretly carrying out operations. We are requesting your cooperation." Ninja! Commander Sasaki was stunned for a moment, then smiled and laughed. It seems that the emperor finally couldn't help it and even sent out the ninjas who had long been protecting the emperor's palace. Ninjas are the elite among elites, samurai among samurai. Every member of them possesses power that surpasses ordinary people. Unfortunately, this organizational force has been passed down and only obeys the emperor, and is not an armed force under the jurisdiction of the military. Commander Sasaki said coldly, "Cooperate, of course. In this operation, we will use all our firepower and weapons, regardless of public property and casualties. No matter how much it costs, we must kill that man in one battle." Risen Tokyo, Kanagawa District. This is considered the border of Tokyo. The streets and buildings are far less prosperous than those in the city. Coupled with the invasion of the American Devils, there are very few pedestrians on the road. However, there is a school gym that is good enough to be ranked in the top 10, the Hojo Itoryu, which is rumored to enshrine the demon sword Murasame. Kyle arrived at the entrance of the school's gym and was surprised to find that there was no guard at the entrance of the gym, and the main door of the main gym was also kept wide open. Have all the people inside been evacuated? Kyle didn't care. It didn't make much difference to him whether the people in the gym stayed to defend or retreated. His goal is to destroy the dojo and wipe out the foundation of the so-called Bushido. Kyle had a blank expression on his face. He returned to his original Dark Knight suit and walked grimly into the main gym. When he walked into the yard, he found that the people in the dojo had not evacuated. Instead, they were kneeling in an orderly manner in the main hall. A middle-aged man in a black robe and kimono sat in the front, and about 50 black-clad sword-fighting disciples sat behind him, all facing the door with their eyes closed. "You are finally here. We have been waiting for a long time." The middle-aged man opened his eyes and looked at Kyle, who was standing tall at the door of the main hall. "Devil Kyle, come and challenge me." Kyle smiled and said the same opening words as always. I am Hojo Maru, the 21st generation master of the Hojo Itoria school. The middle-aged man picked up the sheathed Hikaru sword beside him, slowly stood up, and said firmly, on behalf of the Hojo Itoria school, I accept your challenge. As soon as he finished speaking, the 50 sword-fighting disciples behind him stood up at the same time, holding the swords they had prepared long ago, ready to fight. Hojo Maru said calmly, I know that I have no chance of winning against you alone, so we will attack together. That's how it should be. Kyle nodded in satisfaction. His eyes fell on the risen sword held by the man, and he said with some interest, is that the legendary demon sword Murasame in your hand? That's right, Murasame should not have been unsheathed. But unfortunately, this is the moment of life and death for Hojo Itorio, and we can only go against our ancestors and use it. Hojo Maru said, holding the scabbard with his left hand and the delicately carved hilt with his right hand, and pulled out the slender Murasame inch by inch. Kyle looked at the so-called demon sword. The hilt of the sword is an artistic-grade master carving, and the blade is as bright as a mirror with a cold glow. It looks very good, with the ancient craftsmanship level of Razang. It is almost as good as Howard's sodium carbon steel one-handed sword forged with high-end technology. But in fact, it seems that there is no obvious difference from other Risen swords. Chapter 106 Super Ninja This School's Dojo is different from the previous ones that overestimated their own capabilities or adhered to Bushido. It seems that they are very aware of their own weakness and the strength of the enemy and are determined to fight to the death. Let's begin. Kyle stared seriously, raised his fists and crossed them in front of his chest. 6 dark claws stretched out sharply, and the Venom suit also entered a full coverage combat state. His dark body, which seemed to be born purely for fighting and killing, released a cold, tyrannical, and oppressive aura that made people afraid to approach. All disciples of Hojo Itorio, listen up. We will live and die with the gym today, and fight to the last drop of blood. Hojo Maru shouted, holding Murasame in both hands and stretching in front of him. The swordsmanship disciples behind him also drew their swords with the belief that they would die. Kill! Everyone in the gym hall growled, raised their swords, and rushed forward in their wooden clogs. Come on! Kyle smiled coldly, without any intention of dodging. He lowered his body and sprinted forward, choosing to fight in a one-on-many head-on battle. He was used to fighting many with one blow. For him, it was like a common thing. Kyle accelerated into the group of warriors and quickly raised his right hand to block. Suddenly, nearly a dozen swords slashed forward at the vibranium arm guard. The ability to absorb external kinetic energy easily blocked all the oncoming attacks. He swung the sharp claw of his right hand downward, and several warriors within half a meter in front of him immediately screamed and fell back to the ground, covering their abdomens with blood spurting out. This was only the beginning of a bloody battle, as other warriors soon stepped forward to fill the gap. Several Razang swords landed on Kyle's defenseless back, but they did not break through the tough protection of the Venom suit. The warriors opened their mouths in horror, and the next moment, their bodies were torn by the sharp claws like paper, with flesh and blood splattering everywhere. Kyle seemed to be repeating the same battle as before, ignoring the enemy's sword attacks, and not caring even if he was injured, and immersed in the killing like a monster. After nearly 10 samurai fell to the ground, Hojo Maru, who was in the middle of the battle, could no longer hold back and shouted, "Attack!" Being besieged by many warriors, Kyle raised his scarlet eyes and was about to look for the figure of the Hojo gym master. But 2 tiny sounds breaking through the wind faintly reached his ears. In his field of vision, 2 dart-shaped hidden weapons continued to grow larger and exploded at a close distance at a speed faster than ordinary bullets, and they were accurate and ruthless enough to shoot into his eyes. Kyle, a super soldier, had no time to dodge the attack of the hidden weapon, which was hard to defend against. He could only quickly close his eyes. The dart pierced his eyelids, protected by venom, causing a subtle numb and tingling sensation. Now, Hojo Maru and 9 samurai, who had been wandering at the back of the battle, looking for an opportunity, quickly stepped forward, bursting out at a speed far exceeding their previous speed, approaching Kyle, who had his eyes closed. Their movements were swift and powerful, and as they passed by Kyle's side, they slashed through the air with great speed, breaking through the venom-protected outer layer and leaving 10 long bloody marks on his sturdy body. Careless, Kyle closed his eyes calmly, sensing the last warrior retreating from his shoulder. He quickly stretched out his right hand, grabbed the man's calf, and simply dragged the enemy's body high up, then slammed it down to the floor with all his strength. Sixth brother, Xiao Lu. The remaining 9 people who retreated to a safe distance after the attack cried out in surprise. The seriously injured Kyle opened his red eyes and looked down at the young samurai who was groaning in pain. He was also dressed in the black kimono of the same school, but the card abilities he possessed were far beyond the reach of those swordsmanship disciples. True assassination mastery, true hidden weapon mastery, true disguise mastery, poison mastery, forbearance psychology mastery. There are more than 20 green ability cards, all of which are based on extreme assassination techniques. Among them, there is also a particularly conspicuous blue ability card, Super Ninja, a super ninja physique unique to the Rizang warriors, an inferior version of the super soldier. Blue ability card. Various poisons and hormone mixtures are continuously injected into the samurai's body. After the samurai endure inhuman pain, the human body's potential is forcibly tapped, and the super ninja physique is obtained in exchange for the lifespan of the body. The genes in the body are unstable, cells will no longer age and die, and characteristics similar to those of cancer patients will appear. Gain the top strength, speed, reaction ability of normal humans, as well as the ultimate physical endurance and resistance to impact. The natural lifespan cannot exceed 50 years, so there really are ninjas in Rizang. I underestimated you. Kyle sneered, clamped the neck of the ninja with his right arm, and stood up while dragging his injured body. He glanced at the ninja caught in the arm. The ninja's ability to withstand blows was indeed quite good. After enduring the violent blow just now, he was still conscious and kicking his feet in the air, struggling violently. Unfortunately, Kyle's super soldier is a higher-level super ninja, and his mutation and evolution are even more perfect. The opponent can't shake his powerful arms at all. Boss! The 8 ninjas who were disguised as swordsmanship disciples looked anxiously at the leader, Hojo Maru, and waited for his orders. Hojo Maru shook his head indifferently, ignoring the struggling ninja, and looked coldly at Kyle while holding the blood-stained Murasame. "You're not the original owner of this place, are you?" Kyle asked with narrowed eyes. "The original owner of the hall has long been dead. All of us here are disguised people from our ninja organization and the military." Hojo Maru said coldly, "You have nowhere to escape. Put down Shaolu in your hands, and I can still let you live to see His Majesty the Emperor." "Sorry, I never accept threats from others." Kyle chuckled and stretched his right arm with all his strength, clamping the ninja's neck with a crackling sound. The ninja struggled a little, but his neck was broken and his limbs fell lifelessly. He loosened the protection of his right arm with the vibranium arm guard and threw the ninja's body to the floor. "You!" The other 8 ninjas shouted angrily, but the next scene made them open their eyes wide in horror. Kyle was standing tall, breathing slightly, and the wounds on his body, large and small, were healing quickly, which looked extremely strange. Hojo Maru, the leader of the ninja team, said as if he had expected it. As the surviving soldiers of the army said, it is a very strong self-healing ability. Kyle frowned slightly. Something was wrong. The other party already knew that he had super self-healing ability, so why would he stop attacking after one strike and let him delay his recovery? He suddenly realized that something was wrong with his body. He reached behind with his left hand and found that the wound on his back caused by Hojo Maru showed no signs of self-healing and was still bleeding. This is the demon sword Murasame. It can kill with one strike, and the wounds it causes can never be healed. You can only let the blood in your body flow out. Hojo Maru smiled and raised the Murasame in his hand, which was covered with enchanting blood. Chapter 107. Fighting the Bloody Road Demon Sword Murasame. A Japanese sword made of sodium carbon steel metal and crafted with extremely high craftsmanship. Blue item card. The sodium carbon steel content mixed in it is enough to exert its special effects. That is, It is tough and sharp and can inhibit the body's healing factors and cause permanent trauma. After being baptized by blood for a long time, the blade has a faint dark red color and a bloody smell. Kyle looked at the Murasame held by Hojo Maru nearby and immediately understood the information on the item card displayed on it. The so-called Bloody Demon Sword was actually a handmade Japanese mulberry sword containing sodium carbon steel. No wonder the cut on his back could not be healed in a short time, even by the self-healing factor. Kyle was wounded on his back, but he remained calm and stood still, alert to the remaining 9 ninjas around him. The super ninja's extraordinary physique, coupled with the insidious hidden weapons that were hard to defend against, would be disadvantageous to him if he continued to delay. You can fight, but you don't have to. Chirp. When the atmosphere in the hall was still in a stalemate, a loud eagle cry came from the distant sky outside the school's gym, and the penetrating sound waves echoed clearly in the room. The ninjas in the gym thought it was just an ordinary eagle and didn't take it seriously. They continued to stare at Kyle's body with a serious look. Kyle heard the familiar cry of an eagle outside, and his face hidden under the hood of the Venom suit changed slightly. This is a warning signal. The volume proves that an enemy air force or a large army is heading this way. It seems that I can't stay any longer. Kyle made up his mind quietly and glanced around with cold eyes. At this time, Hojo Maru showed a mysterious smile again. Your physique is really comparable to that of a monster. You can actually last so long. It's just a small cut. Kyle frowned and stopped talking halfway. He felt his nerves being attacked by something. His body trembled uncontrollably, and he fell down with his body bent. In the end, he could only barely support himself on the floor with his claws. The edges of our weapons and swords are all coated with nerve-paralyzing poison. The amount you ingested should be enough to paralyze an adult elephant for 3 days and 3 nights. After Hojo Maru finished his confident explanation, Kyle's eyelids drooped, his hands drooped limply, and he fell to the ground, losing consciousness and passing out. Successfully, the other 8 ninjas breathed a sigh of relief when they saw this scene. The sense of oppression from the man in front of them was too strong, far exceeding any enemy they had ever encountered. As long as he was still standing there, no one dared to approach him head-on. Based on the amount of paralytic poison that entered his body, it was undoubtedly successful. Hojo Maru said coldly, but he did not relax his vigilance and gave orders. Little one, little two, you two go over and take a look. The 2 ninjas in the team looked at each other, nodded, and moved forward, one from the left and one from the right towards Kyle, who was unconscious on the ground. 5 meters, 3 meters, 1 meter. The 2 approached Kyle cautiously until they were within half a meter of him. When they found that Kyle still had no reaction or consciousness, they were about to breathe a sigh of relief when Hojo Maru's urgent warning suddenly sounded in their ears. Be careful. Huh. The 2 ninjas instinctively wanted to retreat. Kyle, who was lying on the ground beside them, suddenly turned over, raised his hands, and pointed 2 energy pistols at their chests. Goodbye, Kyle sneered and quickly pulled the trigger. At such a close distance, only 2 bright blue lasers were seen leaving the gun. Then, in front of everyone in the hall, the 2 lively ninjas were pierced by lasers, leaving bloody holes in their bodies, and they fell dead in a pool of blood on the spot. Little one, little two, Hojo Maru shouted in shock and anger. A blue laser shot towards him. He reacted quickly and swung Murasame, breaking the laser in front of him, with blue light splashing everywhere. But then, several blue lasers came one after another, as if they were not targeting the other ninja members, but focusing the attack on him alone. Baka! Hojo Maru, who was always calm and composed, couldn't help but burst into curses at this moment, and rolled quickly to avoid the laser shooting. However, Kyle, as a sharpshooter, predicted the shooting position in advance. So even after rolling several times, a laser still rushed towards Hojo Maru's body. Hojo Maru shouted and hastily raised Murasame to block. The strength in his hands was not yet concentrated, so he managed to block the laser with the blade. The impact force caused Murasame to fly out of his hand and spin. He stood up and tried to catch Murasame in midair with his hands, but a black figure quickly leaped past and caught the hilt of Murasame's sword. Looking at Kyle approaching him, Hojo Maru's pupils shrank and his eyes dimmed with despair. It's interesting that you forced me to use the energy pistol, a rare black technology consumable, Kyle whispered, falling from the air, and the Murasame in his left hand quickly slashed down. This is a slash back at you. Amid Hojo Maru's tragic howls, an arm flew high up from his body covered in blood. This was the result of being cut crookedly. Kyle lifted up Murasame and wanted to make the finishing blow, but he stumbled and almost fell to the ground. He ignored the other ninjas and rushed out of the gym hall alone. "Boss!" The remaining 6 ninjas shouted and quickly approached Hojo Maru, who was covering his severed arm. Hojo Maru collapsed to the ground with a pale face, his forehead covered with cold sweat. He gritted his teeth and endured the pain of his broken hand, saying hoarsely, "Don't worry about me. Go chase the devil, Kyle. He is already injured, and the poison paralyzed his nerves. His body is already at the end of its strength. Go quickly. Don't let him get away. Got it? We will complete the mission." The ninjas growled in response and followed the blood trail to the outside of the gym hall. Kyle gasped for breath, holding Murasame in one hand and the energy pistol in the other, as he walked from the main hall to the yard. He was so dizzy that he almost fell into the small pond. His current condition is very bad. The nerve-paralyzing poison that he had taken into his body was hindering the normal functioning of the muscles and nerves, and some parts of his body were beginning to lose sensory and motor functions. Fortunately, the self-healing factor is being suppressed tightly, but once high-intensity exercise begins, the nerve paralysis poison will spread throughout the body along with the blood. Just now, he was able to break out after falling down and killing the ninja, all thanks to the 2 words "hold on, venom." Once I completely lose consciousness and pass out, you will control my body and escape to a safe place. Kyle whispered softly. Although he still had some life-saving skills and cards to use, he had already prepared for the worst in this battle. "He's there. Don't let him get away." 6 ninjas came out of the main hall, and after seeing Kyle, they sped up towards him. Kyle gritted his teeth and rushed towards the main entrance of the gym. The moment he took a step forward, a sense of danger descended upon his heart, prompting him to retract his foot. The next moment, a shell landed at the entrance of the gym, right in front of Kyle. Fire exploded, and gravel, dust, and blast waves swept away. Kyle rolled over several times on the ground in the yard, and when he got up from the ground with dust all over his head, he was bombarded by continuous and intensive rocket launcher shells, and the main entrance of the gym and the walls on both sides were completely flattened. He looked up and saw everything in his field of vision. The streets outside the gym were filled with Japanese troops. Countless soldiers had rifles, machine guns, and rocket launchers pointed at him. Chapter 108: Thrilling Escape. This is an extremely spectacular and shocking scene. There were ninjas chasing him from behind and thousands of armed Japanese soldiers setting up a defense line in front of him. Countless hostile eyes and gun muzzles were focused on one person. This is really not good. Kyle in the gym yard smiled bitterly. The original Murasame and energy pistol had been turned into cards and put back into the card space. His hands hung down weakly, as if he had lost the thought of resisting and escaping. "Devil Kyle, you have no way to escape. Just surrender." An officer stood in a safe enough area outside the large army and persuaded loudly. The ninjas who had chased out and stopped frowned and said coldly, "Don't do that. This demon's methods are strange and changeable. Please shoot him on the spot." But the officer hesitated, which made Kyle shrug helplessly and said, "Please, do I look like I am at your mercy?" As he spoke, he suddenly pulled out a blue item card from his lowered hand and held it between his 2 fingers. Some of the trump cards have not been used yet. Trying to delay for a few seconds is just waiting for the opportunity to escape. Now it should be almost time. Kyle muttered to himself. The open space where he was standing was covered by clouds and mist, casting a large shadow. The armed soldiers around him seemed to have discovered something with horror, and some of them looked up at the sky in a panic. "What is that, a monster? What a big goshawk with blue feathers. It seems to be approaching this way." The officer also raised his head. When he saw huge amounts of blue eagles swooping down and approaching the gym yard, he seemed to realize something and shouted, "Not good. Everyone open fire." Too late. Kyle shook his head slightly. A powerful energy tide burst out from the soles of his feet. The invisible force pushed his body up into the sky at an extremely fast speed like a rocket. Air dash! Boom-da-da! The dense artillery fire was less than half a second late, landing on the ground where the white air wave was still, crushing a large amount of gravel and soil into powder. Chirp! The swooping Blue Eagle just happened to arrive at the low altitude of the yard and perfectly grabbed Kyle, who had sprinted to the highest point with its claws, spread its huge wings that were 10 meters long, and flapped violently. Several rocket launchers hastily fired from below were directly blown away by the fierce wind and exploded at the low altitude beside it. The Blue Eagle cried loudly and rushed out of the fire and smoke area of the explosion. The flapping of its wings accelerated the air and increased its altitude, carrying Kyle to the high sky at noon. "Where are the fighter planes? You must intercept that monster for me." The officer stared at the Blue Eagle that was about to fly away and yelled loudly to the communicator beside him. At this moment, a small black object fell from the Blue Eagle and landed on the open space in front of the gym. It was a small black ball with a green light on it, rolling on the ground. "What is that?" A group of armed soldiers in front instinctively stepped back. No matter how you looked at it, it looked like a grenade, but which country's grenade would not explode after falling from the sky for so long? A dumb mine? The officer looked at the round object 10 meters away. The green light continued to flash like a countdown and soon turned red. And then nothing happened. Dee, the round object exploded into a black hole-like existence and began to devour everything inside. In the blink of an eye, it quickly expanded from the size of a fist to become a huge sphere with a radius of 50 meters, swallowing up everything inside, including ninjas, armed soldiers, buildings, streets, trees, rocks, and even sounds and lights. Until the area regained its sound and light, the black hole gradually dissipated, and the bright sunshine shone again. The inner scene of Tokyo's Shinagawa district, with the original dojo building as the center, had a giant smooth semicircular hole in the ground. Tokyo border, more than 1,000 meters high. Kyle, who was in the claws of the Blue Eagle, naturally had no idea of the consequences of the alien bomb. He was now a little unconscious, with more than half of his body paralyzed and unable to move. Kyle forced his eyes open, trying to find a safe place, but he saw the clouds behind the Blue Eagle tear apart, and more than a dozen single-man fighter planes buzzing towards him at full speed. Is it ever going to end? Kyle no longer had the energy to complain. His mind was in a daze, and his will and strength were slipping away. He really wanted to sleep. The Blue Eagle cried anxiously, and while being chased by more than a dozen fighter planes, it grabbed Kyle and fled forward at supersonic speed. 10 minutes later, Kyle lost the feeling of the powerful claws holding his body, and the cold wind blew from bottom to top. He realized that he was in a state of natural fall. What happened to Blue Eagle? Kyle squinted his eyes, and through the gap, he could see a fragment of the Blue Eagle rushing off into the distance, with fighter jets chasing after it. His consciousness fell asleep again. He lost control of his body and fell straight down towards the huge snow mountain below. Kyle didn't know how long he slept before he gradually regained consciousness. The first thing he saw when he woke up was that he was in a cave, with cave tunnels everywhere and a steaming natural hot spring next to it. "Venom, what's going on?" Kyle whispered. He was still wearing the Venom suit. It should be Venom's credit that he was able to come here suddenly after falling from a high altitude. Venom proudly expressed his thoughts to him. But after a moment, Kyle understood the current situation. "No wonder I was so hungry." It turned out that 3 days had passed since the last battle. When falling off the snow mountain, Venom spread his gliding wings and landed, then controlled his body to hide in a cave under the snow mountain. "Thank goodness you're here." Kyle breathed a sigh of relief. He had slept for 3 days, and not only had the nerve-paralyzing poison healed, but even the cut on his back had healed. He took off his Venom suit and took out various hot and fresh foods saved as item cards from the card space. While eating quickly to replenish his strength, he jumped naked into the hot spring next to him. Comfortable. Kyle sighed. The temperature of the hot spring was just right, which greatly eased the tension caused by the battle. "By the way, this place is comfortable and safe." Kyle seemed to remember something, and pulled out a blue rare creature card from the card space. After a physical summon, a giant oval egg plopped into the hot spring. Unhatched monster egg current status. In the current environment, there are still 33 years, 9 months, and 7 days left before hatching. Kyle, you sleep really well, brother. My son probably has it too after more than 30 years. Kyle shook his head, filled his stomach, washed his body, put on his underwear and Venom's suit, and restored his prime condition. He followed the instructions of Venom's voice and wanted to return to the original path to leave the cave. After taking a few steps, he was surprised to hear subtle footsteps coming from the naturally formed tunnel next to him. There are actually people here. Kyle reacted quickly, sticking to the wall in disguise at night. As he heard footsteps approaching, a strange Razang man wearing a gas mask and a white coat appeared in his sight. Chapter 109 Mutant Girl Inside the Cave Tunnel. Similar to the underground scientific research guards, they were holding Japanese guns in their hands and checking carefully left and right. After seeing that the other party had no accomplices behind him, Kyle quietly exited from camouflage mode, rushed to his side in one step, and struck him on the back of the neck with a sharp knife. The researcher rolled his eyes, his body went limp, and he collapsed to the ground unconscious. I didn't kill him because I had other uses for him. Venom, it's up to you. Kyle slapped off his battle suit with his hands, and Venom stretched out black tentacles, spun in the air, and the tip pierced into the back of the researcher's head. In less than 10 seconds, Venom searched the memory and captured some fragments of information, which he fed back to him indirectly through his mind's voice. Kyle's heart trembled, as if he had heard something incredible, and he looked towards a cave tunnel in the mountain with doubt. There is a hidden underground research institute here, where almost all of Razang's top biological scientists gather, and they are creating a special kind of human being called Son of God under the order of the Emperor. Venom couldn't explain the specific details clearly. It was only searching for general information, which became more abstract through the transmission of telepathy. Kyle was silent for a moment and asked Venom to disguise the appearance of the battle suit as a complete set of protective gear, including a gas mask, a white coat, plastic gloves, and long boots. He then took the gun and documents from the body of the scientific research guard, and then walked towards the underground research institute. No matter what, he felt a little concerned about this special human being. Kyle followed the direction indicated by Venom and walked through several naturally formed cave tunnels. One of them was artificially built deep inside, and there was a dead end at the end. After checking his identity document, which was equivalent to a pass, the wall opened to reveal the elevator inside. After the elevator went down 50 meters, Kyle arrived at his destination, and a blinding light appeared before his eyes. The huge basement is brightly lit under the bright lights. Various advanced scientific research equipment and glassware are lined up in it, and more than 20 scientific researchers in white coats and protective clothing are working hard. Quick, check to see what data is wrong. 2 more of the Son of God's experiments have just died. Oh, it's K-268 and K-269. Currently, only one of them, K-208, is still alive. Unfortunately, that's not perfect yet, but the radiation gene should be the closest to a stable value right now. Several biologists, ranging in age from 80 to 30, gathered together to discuss something. Kyle pretended to be a guard as he walked through the basement hall. No one looked at him, as everyone else was focused on the data sheets and the tests at hand. Kyle had a smooth journey all the way to the innermost part where there were many mezzanine rooms. He walked towards one of them as if he had a purpose. There was a dedicated guard at the door of the isolation room. When he saw Kyle approaching, he immediately said alertly, "What is your number? You are not allowed to come near here without permission." Before he could finish his words, Kyle suddenly stretched out his right hand to block his mouth, lifted his body, and slammed his head against the iron door, causing him to pass out in a half-dead coma. Kyle took the key from the guard and opened the door to the isolation room. As soon as he opened the door, a strong smell of disinfectant hit his nose. Kyle closed the door and walked into the room. He looked up, and everything in the isolation room came into view. In the room, which was neither too big nor too small, there were running scientific and medical instruments and a huge amount of cylindrical glass tanks filled with translucent liquid. Several tiny pipes were intertwined, and in the middle was a black-haired girl of about 7 or 8 years old. The girl's petite body was naked, as if in some kind of dormant state, curled up like a cat, and her fair and tender skin looked a bit like a porcelain doll. Is this the most perfect result of the research? Kyle frowned, walked to the glass tank, and pressed his left hand on the glass wall. This distance was enough to detect other people's cards. Sure enough, an ability card was floating alone on the girl. Yes, there are no other white-green ability cards, only one, dark blue card. Mind Control. Genetic mutants' unique talent. Mind Control. Rare blue ability card. Their mental strength is more than 10 times that of normal humans, and they have the innate ability to learn quickly, recognize quickly, and control specific objects to move in space. The effect of mind manipulation is related to the distance and weight of the controlled object, as well as the strength of the will of the controlling organism. Current status. Ability is unstable and cannot be extracted. Rare blue prefix. The Razang people are actually creating mutants. Kyle opened his eyes wide in disbelief, looking at the ability card that was similar to Logan's, a talent obtained by a genetic mutant. This is the big universe environment of Marvel's Avengers movie. Unlike the X-Men universe, which has a large number of mutants, this world is full of mutations, technology, magic, and alien mythology. There are very few natural mutants in existence, and the Hulk and Spider-Man are both acquired mutants. Black Panther is inherited. The only ones who actually appeared in the movies were Scarlet Witch, Quicksilver, etc., who were considered pure mutants. And here, there is one too. Unfortunately, the signs of life are too weak. It's a semi-finished product. Kyle felt a little regretful. The medical instrument connected to the glass sink clearly showed the heartbeat characteristics of the mutant girl. The arc of the electric wave bounced almost became a horizontal line. After all, due to the limitations of biology and technology, although mutants have been created, their vitality is extremely weak, and they can only survive in a vegetative state by relying on nutrient solution. Once out of the experimental tank, it is estimated that it will not survive for more than 3 minutes in the outside world. It's worthless. Kyle shook his head and turned to leave. Just as he reached the door, a faint voice suddenly came into his mind. Save me. Kyle stopped stiffly, turned around, and looked solemnly at the little girl in the glass tank, who was still floating motionlessly in the nutrient solution. Illusion? It's definitely not an illusion. Do you want to be free? Then I'll help you. Kyle smiled and walked into the glass tank again. He clenched his right hand, which was protected by the vibranium arm guard, into a fist and punched the glass wall with all his strength. Bang! Under the impact force of tons, several cracks appeared on the thickened, bulletproof glass wall. Kyle's face was indifferent as he continued to swing his right fist. The cracks continued to expand and spread, but the noisy sound also attracted the attention of the researchers and guards in the basement. Oh my God! What are you doing? Stop it! After the two personnel opened the door, they saw Kyle punching the glass sink inside, and were so scared that they fell to the ground. As if Kyle didn't hear their words, he gathered strength with his right hand and punched the cracked glass wall with all his strength. With a click, under the desperate gaze of the medical staff, the sink broke open, and the nutrient solution inside rushed out with the mutant girl's body. Chapter 110, Do You Want Power? Clatter. The translucent nutrient liquid flowed all over the ground. The mutant girl's body was pulled by the instrument wires and tubes, and she rolled on the ground curled up with her eyes closed. Kyle waved his hand, and a white item card came out, which turned into a large windbreaker that was draped over her naked body. Who are you? Let go of the experiment. Damn it, if she stays out like this, she'll die. The two researchers who were crowded at the door and couldn't figure out the situation started cursing. Kyle indifferently picked up the Japanese gun and pointed it at them. He pulled the trigger repeatedly. The bullets hit the medical staff in the middle of their eyebrows. The noise in the isolation room subsided again. Thank you. A faint sound came into his mind again. Kyle turned around and saw the unconscious mutant girl on the ground. The electrocardiogram on the instrument screen was fluctuating more faintly, indicating that her vital signs were declining. Kyle hesitated for a moment. Then, without thinking too much, he pulled out a white ability card and used it to penetrate the mutant girl's body. In just half a second, The horizontal line on the silent ECG screen next to it quickly bounced up and down to form a curve with huge contrast. In Kyle's perception, the mutant girl who was originally dead on the ground became full of vitality. Her fair face regained its rosy color, and her breathing and heartbeat were clearly visible. It actually works. It seems your life shouldn't end here. Kyle sighed. What he just used was the life increase of the rare white ability card, which can increase a person's natural lifespan by 3 months. This was the first time he tried using it on a dying person, and he didn't expect it to work so quickly. The mutant girl's eyelashes trembled slightly, and then she opened her big eyes. She half sat up with a windbreaker on her shoulders with a surprised look on her face, and then looked at Kyle next to her. "You saved me." Her lips did not move, and after waking up, she was still speaking with her brain waves. "Of course." Kyle squatted down without caring, stared at the girl whom some gentlemen called Little Lowly, and said coldly, "Girl, do you desire longevity and power?" Even with the mutant girl's quick cognitive ability, she didn't fully understand the meaning of Kyle's words, but she still nodded firmly and grabbed the trouser leg of Venom's suit with her small hands. "That's good. From now on, you must obey my orders," Kyle said. The girl understood what he said and nodded again. Someone broke into the lab. Behind Kyle, there were the sounds of footsteps at the door. Several guards in protective suits holding guns entered the room and started shooting. The bullets hit the back of the Venom suit and bounced off one after another. "Use your ability to kill them. Can you do it?" Kyle didn't turn around to pay attention to the guards who were shooting, but spoke to the girl in front of him. His philosophy is simple. "I will save you, but it won't be in vain. I must prove the value of my existence here." The mutant girl opened her clear eyes wide, and without any hesitation, she cast her gaze towards the large equipment beside the sink. The device seemed to be pulled by some invisible force, floating weightlessly, but after moving half a meter towards the enemy at the door, it lost its kinetic energy and fell down. "You're not used to the ability yet. Try a smaller object," Kyle suggested, still being tickled by bullets shooting at his back. The mutant girl nodded, took a deep breath, and looked at the broken glass on the ground again. Several pieces of glass floated lightly and flew towards the door with a whoosh, turning into sharp weapons and piercing into the hearts of the guards. "Well done!" Kyle stood up with some satisfaction. At the same time, all the guards behind him fell down. This is rapid cognition. Maybe this was the girl's first time killing someone, but her cognitive ability allowed her to quickly deduce in her mind. If she wanted to kill dead man with a few pieces of broken glass, she would need to attack the fatal parts, that is, the brain or the heart. "You will follow me from now on." Kelton paused and asked, "Do you have a name?" "K208. Faced with the answer, the mutant girl replied with her mind, "That's not a name." Kyle shook his head, looked at the mutant girl's bright and clear eyes, and said, "From now on, you will be called Rain Eyes Carl. You can call me Boss, or Clan Leader." "Boss." Yutong transmitted the message and simply selected one. "Learn to speak properly in the future, and don't always use telepathy," Kyle said with a headache. The girl's telepathy was very similar to the voice of her heart when she was symbiotic with Venom. Sometimes the two voices overlapped in his mind, buzzing endlessly. "Yes, boss." Yutong spoke, her voice rather soft and baby-like. "I'll teach you the rest later. Now I'll teach you one thing, killing." Kyle smiled and took Yutong with him as he walked towards the dozen guards outside the door who were gathering their resistance. The Emperor's residence. The Emperor knelt in the hall with a haggard face, his subordinates quietly waiting beside him. He just sent back the latest news. The Devil Kyle was not dead, and he destroyed the Biological Research Institute next to Mount Fuji, leaving behind the usual devil cards. Is that man really a devil from hell? Why can't he be killed? The ninja organization and the army armed forces are all a group of. The Emperor sighed heavily. The dead are gone. Every night these days, he would wake up from sleep by dreaming about the semicircular cave in the Shinai area that looked like a punishment from heaven. The Emperor was silent for a long time, and finally made a decision in his heart and said softly, "Go and prepare. Let the soldiers and troops still outside the Rizang mainland stop the war and withdraw to the mainland." "Your Majesty, this?" The subordinate hesitated. not knowing whether he should speak up to persuade him. The emperor waved his sleeves decisively. Go. The situation has forced us to bow our heads. That man has only been here for less than a week, and Tokyo is about to fall. If he stays here, Risen will not even be a country. I believe the warlords and the cabinet will agree with my decision. Yes, the subordinate nodded and retreated. He knew that this was a sign that the emperor was going to choose to surrender. Forced to surrender by an intruder. It's very shameful, but also very realistic. Only when you face that man will you know how terrible he is. Rizang mobilized soldiers from the Asian war front and sent them back to his homeland. Although he did not openly surrender, the obvious fact that he was about to stop the fighting shocked all the countries in the world that were participating in the war and watching the war. Many high-ranking officials of various countries were puzzled. Why did Rizang, who was so arrogant not long ago, voluntarily withdraw its troops? They sent agents to investigate and soon found the reason behind it and got the exact answer. Kyle, it's that warmongerer again. The demon butcher. Tokyo has closed off all news to the outside world in the past few days. Most people think that Kyle, who went to Tokyo alone, has died, but some people in America and Europe are unwilling to believe it. Unexpectedly, not only did he not die, but he was also alive and kicking and making a lot of trouble in Tokyo. The main Air Force base was completely destroyed. More than half of the school gyms that were the cornerstone of Bushido were lost, and tens of thousands of army soldiers and ninja organizations were killed. Too violent. After this battle, Kyle got another nickname, Tyrant. And this is still the premise that Rizang has not formally announced its surrender. When Rizang surrenders and returns, Kyle will be the god in the eyes of the people who yearn for peace. An irreplaceable superhero. Chapter 111, Nuclear Peace, United States, Office of Congressman. A goblet filled with more than half of the red wine fell heavily to the floor. The female secretary timidly retreated to the corner. Counselor Ivan's face was full of ferocity, and he roared angrily. What's going on? Is Rizang really going to surrender? The secretary replied, Our people did say that. The emperor has been persuading the warlords and the cabinet to surrender once the army has completely returned to the mainland. What a bunch of rubbish. The power of a country can't even handle one person. Ivan sat in his office chair, his forehead covered with cold sweat. He thought anxiously for a long time and came to the conclusion, we must not let him come back. If he comes back, I'm afraid I'll be finished. When Rizang announces his surrender in 2 days, that man will come back. There is no way to stop this trend now, the female secretary said helplessly. So, he must die in Rizang. If the army, ninjas, and fighter planes can't kill him, then... Ivan paused and asked coldly, didn't the Strategic Research Department say today that the 2 experimental nuclear weapons have been basically completed? Yes. The female secretary looked at him nervously and said, but there are only 2 experimental prototype nuclear bombs. Even if they're dropped on Tokyo, they can probably cover less than half of the area. Ivan scratched his head fiercely, muttering with veins bulging. Half, that's enough. I don't believe that luck is always on his side. The master of Hydra and the underground undead will protect us. The female secretary continued to persuade him. Forcing Kyle, a war hero, to Tokyo, the U.S. top brass now feels that they have done something wrong and will never allow you to use nuclear weapons again. If you make a wrong move, you will have to follow the wrong steps in the future. You can test nuclear bombs to deter other countries, and you can accidentally eliminate powerful competitors. They dare not agree and become the eternal sinner, but they will not take the initiative to veto it. Ivan had made up his mind, narrowed his eyes, and said, Go, mobilize the people we have planted around the top leaders, and I will guide and facilitate this matter. I understand. The secretary nodded. 1 day later, in the border area of Rizang, Tokyo, 2 people, one big and one small, with a huge difference in size, were walking in the wilderness. Kyle's Venom suit is disguised as a hooded leather jacket, jeans, and leather boots, making him look more mature and stable. The hood covers his conspicuous blonde hair. Yutong had her black hair tied up to her waist and wore a Japanese kimono that was a few sizes smaller. The reason was that even in Kyle's well-stocked card space, there was really no children's clothing. so he could only temporarily find a set of children's kimono for her to wear in the research institute. She followed Kyle in her clogs. Her short stature of 1.1 meters was not even as tall as his waist, and her exposed fair skin made her look like an exquisite porcelain doll. By the way, this is for you. Kyle thought for a moment, pulled out a blue card, transformed it into a physical card, and threw it backwards. Yutong stared intently, without any intention of reaching out to catch it. The rectangular object was suspended in front of her. It was the Higashinato Murasame, and the blade shone coldly in the sunlight. Your mind control ability must adapt to the weight of the Murasame. When you can move it easily to 10 meters away from your body, your attack ability will be greatly improved. Kyle pondered. The control strengthened by the mind is neither strong nor weak. The weight and distance of the manipulated object greatly limit the use of this ability. However, if it is paired with a sodium carbon steel sword, the effect will be completely different with a qualitative change. Yutong nodded as if she understood, as if she had been given a toy. Under the control of her mind, the Murasame sword used her body as the axis and continued to slowly rotate within 1 meter of her body. But why does it feel so weird? Kyle glanced back and couldn't help but complain in his heart and said, "Come on, try to attack me." Yutong raised her eyes and used her mind to control the tip of Murasame's sword to stab his back slightly faster. Kyle didn't even look back. He flicked the fingers of his right hand wrapped in the vibranium arm guard and knocked Murasame back with a buzzing sound. Too slow, try again. Kyle shook his head slightly. In fact, the speed was already quite fast. Ordinary soldiers would not be able to dodge it without any precautions. But for him, it was really too slow. Yutong was a little unconvinced and continued to control Murasame with her mind to attack Kyle. The result was naturally a complete defeat, but in the process, her mind control ability became more and more proficient. The two of them walked one after the other, approaching the army headquarters in Tokyo. "Okay, let's take a break," Kyle said. Yutong behind him was in low spirits, gasping for breath after consuming huge amounts of energy and struggling to drag the Murasame with both hands. This should be the last battle of this trip to Razang. Kyle stood on the hillside, looking down at the large camping base on the flat ground, less than 100 meters below. The top management of Razang has finally shown some signs of loosening up. As long as they speed up the pace and deliver a final devastating blow, this straw will be enough to break the camel's back. But as Kyle was about to set off when he turned around after hearing some sound. At the end of the sky behind him, he could vaguely see a B-29 bomber flying across the sky. Then an object was dropped. "Wait, no way." Kyle opened his mouth wide. The worst thought flashed through his mind, and he watched the object fall to the ground 1,000 meters away. Bang! The blindingly bright daylight shone from the ground as far as the eye could see. Kyle's expression changed drastically. He reacted quickly and picked up Yutong behind him and rushed towards the army headquarters at full speed. Behind him, huge amounts of mushroom explosion clouds appeared, rapidly expanding toward the sky and the earth. The scorching explosion tides washed away and destroyed everything on the ground. Nuclear bomb. It's actually a nuclear bomb. Kyle's eyes were bloodshot, and he grabbed Yutong as if racing against death, the explosive blast behind him constantly closing the distance between them. If he can't find enough shelter and is hit by a nuclear bomb directly on the ground, he will be turned into ashes before Thanos snaps his fingers. Sprint in the air, charge. Faster. Kyle stomped on the air, and his already terrifying speed exploded to a higher level. He rushed into the main base with a wave of air. There was chaos in the army headquarters, with countless soldiers fleeing in despair. Some officers had just taken off their shirts and committed suicide by cutting their stomachs. Kyle broke into the base with Yutong. He quickly glanced around and saw a sealed dry well. He rushed forward quickly, used Murasame to cut open the sealed chain, and jumped down with Yutong in his hand. Almost the next moment after he jumped into the dry well, the explosion wave of the nuclear bomb engulfed the base above, and the dust and ash carrying the scorching blast wave poured into the mouth of the dry well. Squeak. The first to scream was Venom, who quickly fell off Kyle's body under the scorching heat of the nuclear bomb. Kyle gritted his teeth, propped himself up against the wall of the well with his bare upper body, and used his bare upper body to resist the damage from the blast and radiation. The tough skin and muscles were burned and torn by the impact energy, but were forcibly repaired under the self-healing factor. The damage and self-healing became a torturous tug-of-war. Kyle held on tightly, and despite the pain that his bones were about to melt, he stood like a humanoid monster in the aftermath of a nuclear bomb. Chapter 112: Return of the Hero. At the end of World War II, the United States dropped 2 experimental nuclear bombs in the Razang area. This is enough to affect the World War situation and deter all countries. The destructive weapons appeared on the Earth for the first time. The indiscriminate carpet explosions and inhumane radiation far exceeded the previous natural disasters and virus plagues. The whole world was shocked. Razang was already planning to surrender under the attack of the nuclear bomb. But now he really didn't waste any more time and announced his unconditional surrender to the world within 1 day of the nuclear bomb. Razang's withdrawal from the Asian battlefield also means that the Second World War in the history of mankind on Marvel Earth has come to an end. People all over the world cheered for this. The long-awaited period of peace had finally arrived. The streets and alleys of every city in the United States were decorated with lights and fireworks. It was more than 10 times more grand than previous Christmases. Most people partied nonstop for 3 days and 3 nights. During this time, they certainly did not forget the greatest contributor to world peace, the war hero Kyle. After the end of World War II, thousands of people waited patiently for 3 days. But the New York military still did not send any signs about Kyle's return. Countless media outlets that wanted to interview were denied entry into white buildings and military bases and were strictly prohibited from asking about this topic. This made the people, while excited and happy, finally realize that something was amiss. Why hasn't General Kyle come back yet? Even if the transport fighter plane is delayed, it's time to return to America now. God, why didn't our superhero come back? What about Admiral Chester? Won't the military give an explanation? From the elderly to the young children, people are looking forward to it every day. The topic of peace after the end of World War II was suppressed by the topic of hero Kyle did not return in just a few days, and other countries were also watching and discussing. The senior lawmakers felt that they could no longer hide the truth from the public and were preparing to discuss a cover-up statement. Unexpectedly, at this moment, a piece of information began to circulate from nowhere. When the military dropped 2 nuclear bombs on Razang, Tokyo, Major General Kyle was still fighting there, and no one sent a transport fighter plane to contact for pickup in advance. As soon as this news spread in New York, the U.S. top brass realized that something was wrong and wanted to suppress it, but they still underestimated the high attention of New Yorkers to topics related to Kyle. In less than half a day, this news exploded on the mainland like a super-large nuclear bomb. Countless people were half believing and half doubting, and at the same time, they were all shocked. My God, if that's the case, then Major General Kyle wouldn't. War heroes cannot die. How could they die at the hands of their own people? One of our own? I'm afraid the higher-ups don't consider him one of their own, right? The top management didn't make any comments, so they probably agreed to it. We, the public, must be given an explanation and reasoning for this matter. The next morning after the news spread, countless people poured into large cities, such as New York and Washington, in an emotional state. Locals organized their own teams, holding large and small signs and marching in the streets, paralyzing urban traffic. The huge crowd surrounded the military bases in Washington and New York. The top leaders panicked and immediately mobilized the city police and the military to maintain order and quell the riots. But they found that many soldiers and police officers had asked for temporary leave, while some simply resigned, put on bright coats, held up questioning signs, and joined the parade. Only then did the top management realize how great Kyle's influence was. As a war hero who pacified World War II and the beginning of world peace, his prestige has undoubtedly reached a terrifying peak that even God and the gods have to avoid his edge. It just so happens that this major and unbearable news happened to be spread at this time. How could it not make thousands of people angry and crazy? On the top floor of Stark Industries, Howard, dressed in a suit and gentlemanly manner, leaned against the balcony railing, looking at the densely packed people on the street below, and silently lit a cigarette. You have done it, but why did you never come back like Steve? I was thinking that when we have a child someday, I will definitely let you be the child's godfather. Even the original promises of drinking hard after the war, manufacturing artificial intelligence, developing new energy elements, and building a business empire of weapons and technology are all going to be broken? Howard muttered to himself, sighed heavily, and smoked alone with his head down, the smoke he exhaled drifting away in the wind. Beep! Just then, the phone in his suit pocket rang. Are you annoying? Howard stubbed out his cigarette irritably and suddenly seemed to remember something. He was stunned for half a second by the ringing. Etc. Who else can I call him now besides that person? Howard shuddered and hurriedly took out the old cell phone from his pocket. After taking a deep breath to calm himself down, he answered the call with trembling fingers. Howard! Kyle's usual cold voice came from the other end of the phone. Kyle, it's really you. Howard laughed, his eyes slightly moist, and kissed the old cell phone hard. Wow, don't be so disgusting, sending such burning emotions to your bunny girls, Kyle said with a chill. This old gentleman has become more and more frivolous in just 2 weeks. I'm so excited, man, Howard said angrily and sadly. It's been more than a week since the war ended, and you haven't come back yet. I thought you were really hit by that nuclear bomb. Kyle, I'm sorry I got hit. Howard, he hesitated for a moment and tried to ask. Kyle, are you a human or a ghost now? Nonsense. You are a scientific talent. Why do you believe in ghosts and gods? I'm already outside the central city of New York. There are too many people here, and the traffic is paralyzed. I can't get in. Please send that special plane to pick me up, Kyle said angrily. The last time he had a brief discussion with Howard about the concept and structure of helicopters before heading to Razang, he knew that Howard had already begun to modify the structure of a small transport fighter, creating the first small and convenient semi-helicopter as a personal vehicle. It has to be said that the benefits of having a friend who is a top-notch brain, forward-thinking, and a technological talent with full hands-on skills are perfectly reflected at this time. The traffic in New York City is paralyzed because of you, Howard complained to the phone. Knowing that Kyle returned safely, his previous boredom and sadness disappeared. Howard smiled and said, I heard that the new president, congressmen, and senior military officials are being forced by the unprecedented number of protesters to gather at the White House Plaza in Washington to hold a press conference to give a public explanation. That intelligence is... As soon as Kyle started to speak, Howard knew what he wanted to ask and said with a smile, Yes, it was me and Nick Fury who deliberately spread the intelligence information. We wanted to use the power of the people to put pressure on the top leaders and get justice for you. Kyle felt warm in his heart, and after a pause, he said coldly to the phone, Drive a helicopter over here and take me directly to Washington Square. It's time to clean up these little rats who are playing dirty tricks behind the scenes. Now that he's back, why do we need justice? In this world, whoever has the bigger fist has the final say. Chapter 113 King in Washington, Washington, USA. Since this is not the city where the hero Kyle was born, New York, the number of marching people here is not so large that it would fill up the entire city. But even closer to the central city, it was still crowded and noisy, especially the White House Plaza where the top American officials were about to give public speeches. Outside the defense line of the speech platform, a large number of media had already positioned themselves in the inner 3 circles. As for the outer 3 circles and even further out, there was no end to the crowd at a glance. Among the onlookers, a little boy of about 7 years old held the mold of Kyle's battle suit in one hand and firmly grasped the trouser leg of the uncle next to him with the other hand, and asked anxiously, Dad, did the hero Kyle really die? How is that possible? The uncle smiled, rubbed the boy's short hair vigorously, and said confidently and firmly, Major General Kyle, he will not die. The people crowded around also laughed and echoed. That's right. How could a war hero die? He is a superhero who suppresses wars and chaos. He's a god in our hearts. Maybe he's just like the captain. He just fell asleep somewhere and will come back when he wakes up. When they talked about Kyle, their faces were filled with smiles, confidence, pride, and even a glimmer of hope. The media nearby kept taking photos and videos to record this rare scene. It was the first time that someone's prestige was enough to replace the gods and was worshipped by thousands of people without any black spots. Here it comes. Following the reminder from the square, all the people and media watching the parade immediately turned their eyes to the White House podium. It can be seen that the new president with a square face and middle-aged appearance is walking in front, accompanied by a group of parliamentary politicians in suits and ties, and generals wearing medals and officer uniforms. They walk out of the door of the office building under the cover of armed soldiers and step onto the slightly wider podium for speeches. Dozens of government officials and generals stopped at the back half of the platform, their faces solemn and serious, causing the onlookers to subconsciously quiet down. The new president wiped the sweat from his forehead, walked forward to the loudspeaker microphone, and faced the people and media outside the police line below, saying in his usual politician's tone, "Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon." However, his words were quickly interrupted by the people below. "Mr. President, please skip the polite preface. We are here only for an explanation and the truth. Why hasn't General Kyle returned yet?" The new president quickly covered up his embarrassment, steadied the microphone with his hand, and said, "Major General Kyle." He was about to speak fluently about the cover-up remarks made by the higher-ups just now. But just as he opened his mouth to speak, he choked and stopped. The new president looked down at the countless pairs of eyes filled with hope and expectation, and despite his excellent speaking skills, he was speechless for a moment. Just when the president was in trouble, a spiral buzzing noise suddenly came from the sky not far away. Everyone looked up in surprise and saw a new type of aircraft with bamboo helicopter wings slowly flying towards the platform of the White House square. The armed soldiers and guards originally thought it was a terrorist attack and were preparing to rush to the platform to cover the retreat of senior officials. But when they saw a tall figure emerging from the door of the helicopter, they immediately stopped. In other words, everyone below stopped moving in a daze, holding their breath, staring with wide eyes at the young man in battle suit standing on the plane door. "It's General Kyle." I don't know who started the shouting, and then the Washington Square, which had been silent, suddenly became boiling with excitement. "Our war hero has returned." The people raised their arms high and cheered with tears in their eyes. The huge sound waves spread quickly, and soon the whole city of Washington was filled with the jubilant sounds of the hero's return. At this moment, the most embarrassed were the high-level executives on the podium who were originally the focus of attention. They could only look at the approaching helicopter with bitter smiles and applause. The helicopter stopped at an altitude of nearly 20 meters above the platform and hovered in the air. Kyle nodded, then leaped downwards, gliding a little to slow down, and finally landed lightly in the center of the podium. Dressed in a night battle suit and carrying his iconic one-handed sword, he stood tall and cool on the platform. With the aura of a superhero, he immediately became the most dazzling protagonist on the spot, and even the highest-ranking politicians and generals had to bow their heads in front of him. The thousands of people below were still clapping excitedly. The applause was thunderous. "Major General Kyle, you are finally back." The president turned around and tried to say something friendly, but Kyle didn't even look at him and walked alone towards where the congressmen and generals were. Faced with the approach of this god of death, even the generals who had experienced various battles had slightly changed expressions, not to mention the congressmen sitting in the greenhouse, whose faces turned pale. Among them, Senator Ivan, who was standing a little further back, and several other senators clenched their hands nervously, trying to resist the urge to collapse to the ground in fear. "Kyle." Admiral Chester sighed and walked forward. "General Chester, it's not what you wished, but I'm back after all." Kyle stopped and said coldly, "Kyle, no matter what you've been through, it's all my fault. Don't hurt anyone else." Admiral Chester was interrupted by Kyle before he could finish his words. "No, you're not wrong," Kyle sneered. "You are just senile." General Chester was speechless and did not refute. His hair turned white like a haggard old man. The helicopter remained suspended in the low air. A rope was dropped from the cabin, and Fury slid down to the platform. When Howard knew Kyle had returned, he notified Fury immediately, and then he and Fury rushed to the White House Plaza in Washington. There is a purpose for doing this, of course. "Fury, who did you find out?" Kyle waved at Fury behind him and glanced at the congressmen in front of him. The congressmen were frightened, not knowing what this war hero was going to do right after returning. and that one. Fury walked forward, searching with sharp eyes, and pointed out 3 senators, including Ivan. The 3 congressmen who were named trembled slightly. The other congressmen and generals didn't understand why, but they subconsciously moved away from the 3 and retreated to a safe distance. Oh! Kyle nodded indifferently and walked towards the 3 congressmen. Major General Kyle, what do you want to do? Don't come over here. Ivan's eyes flashed with panic, and he shouted, "This is the White House Square." In front of the congressmen and generals representing the country, as well as the general public and the media, please be careful about your behavior. Kyle sneered and pedaled to speed up to Ivan. Before the surrounding armed soldiers could react, he clenched his right fist and hit the opponent's lower abdomen. Bang! With Ivan's ordinary body, he was hit by a punch with a force of over a ton. He was knocked back like a ball, rolled 5 or 6 meters, and hit the white wall of the office building. His body was completely broken, with half of his body stuck in the wall. He opened his eyes wide, and until his death, he couldn't understand why he died in such a simple and brutal way. After making so many careful plans, he didn't even have time to put up a fight. With a bang, the other party stepped on him to death like a cockroach. Chapter 114. Godlike hero Kyle Yu. General Chester's face was filled with horror. He looked at Senator Ivan, who was already dead and could not die anymore. His lips trembled slightly, and he sighed without saying a word. Kyle was not the only one who was shocked by his amazing behavior. The congressmen and officers near the platform, as well as the media and the public far below, all opened their mouths wide. It's too bloody and violent, and the other party is a member of parliament. That trick of yours won't work on me, Kyle whispered coldly, his eyes moving away from Ivan's body and falling on the other 2 congressmen who had collapsed to the ground in front of him. Save me, Admiral, save me. He's crazy. Where are the soldiers and guards? Stop him quickly. The 2 congressmen were trembling with fear, without any gentlemanly manners as before, and they crawled on the platform with difficulty, trying to escape from the area where Kyle was. Kyle looked indifferent as he continued to walk slowly towards the 2 of them. Kyle, stop it. He's a congressman. You will disrupt the national order by doing this. General Chester raised his voice to persuade. Really? Kyle smiled and said coldly, if the top management has been infiltrated by Hydra and is unaware of it, then I don't mind forcibly rectifying the chaos and replacing the top management structure with fresh blood. Hydra? General Chester's expression changed drastically. He looked directly at Kyle and took a deep breath and asked, do you have any evidence? If I say it is it. Who needs evidence? Kyle said as he walked up to another Hydra spy congressman and lifted his left foot with a little force. This time the opponent was really kicked out like a ball, tumbling in the air and hitting the wall pit where Ivan was before. You are too lawless. Even if he is a member of Hydra, he must be punished by law. General Chester frowned deeply. The new president also said hurriedly and seriously, Major General Kyle, although you are a war hero, everything needs to be investigated in detail by the relevant departments. You can't kill a congressman based on suspicion alone. Just do what you think is right. I have a clear conscience, Kyle said, ignoring their warnings or persuasions, and walked towards the last Hydra spy counselor, who collapsed on the ground. Kyle! General Chester gritted his teeth, looked at the congressmen who were filled with fear and trepidation, made an immediate judgment, and quickly raised his arm. With a clatter, dozens of armed soldiers around the platform aimed their weapons at Kyle on the platform. This scene again caused countless people in the square to exclaim. Kelton paused, glanced at the armed soldiers, and asked bluntly, you guys want to be my enemy too? All the armed soldiers trembled slightly and were about to put down their guns with the safety still on. General Chester saw this and shouted with an ugly face, what are you doing? You are elite soldiers who uphold the laws and order of the country. What he feared was not how strong Kyle was as a single soldier, but that Kyle's prestige among the people would allow him to ignore laws and regulations and do whatever he wanted. This is also the main reason why the top leaders of the United States have always been wary of Kyle. The armed soldier hesitated and was about to raise his gun again, but the next moment, the people in the square below said in unison, put down your weapons. Put your weapons down. What are you doing? Major General Kyle certainly had his reasons for what he did. Those congressmen must be spies. You're going to use weapons like this to deal with war heroes who have made contributions to peace. The people don't know what's going on, but they know one thing very clearly. Hero Kyle is definitely right. Whoever deals with Kyle and stands against him is undoubtedly a spy villain of the terrorist organization. Howard, still flying in the low sky with his helicopter, listened to the voices of thousands of people who were speaking up for Kyle and laughed. Kyle, this is the real, on par with the gods. Having already reached the peak of a superhero, after the Battle of Razang, the world returned to peace. Kyle's prestige in people's minds had already created a golden body of justice comparable to that of a god. Under the influence of such enthusiastic voices, dozens of armed soldiers looked at each other and put down their guns. Under the gaze of everyone, Kyle kicked the last Hydra spy senator into the wall pit with a simple kick. The wall had completely collapsed, slightly burying 3 bodies. General Chester did not say anything else. He turned slowly with a tired and old face and left the platform early with his body slightly bent. The new president was silent for a moment. Then his face darkened and he announced to the public in a dignified manner, "Major General Kyle, we have solved the problem of 3 spy congressmen who endanger national security. Later, I will apply to the International Security Council to set up a department to search and eliminate the remnants of the Hydra organization that are still lurking and infiltrating the world. Major General Kyle will supervise the implementation of the specific matters." This was obviously something the people welcomed, and the people in the square cheered for the president's move. He reacted quite quickly, worthy of being the president. Kyle praised in his heart, walked beside the president, and said to the outside world, "Now that the war is over, there is no need for national symbols of conquest and strength. Here, I formally resign from my position as Major General. War hero? I'm retired." Before the public and the media could react, Kyle gave the new president a meaningful look and said softly, "As for the matter you mentioned, let Nick Fury do it. He is my spokesperson." "Ah!" Fury, who was still standing on the platform, exclaimed. Just as he was about to step forward to express his opinion, he saw Kyle sprinting in the air and jumping directly onto the door of the helicopter's cabin. The helicopter rose in unison, carrying Kyle towards the sky in the direction of New York. Amid the waves of public voices, Fury watched the helicopter fly away, smiling bitterly. "Why do I feel like you're throwing the blame at me again?" When Major Kyle was with him, he led the Howling Commandos for him. When he was Major General Kyle, he was a fleet soldier leading a battleship for him. Now that Kyle has resigned from his military rank, I thought he could have a good rest, but I didn't expect that there is still a department that has not been established. Next time, I must ask him for extra pay. Fury gritted his teeth. On a helicopter leaving Washington, D.C., Howard sat in the driver's seat, while Kyle and a little black-haired girl wearing a hooded dress sat in the back seat. "It's still early. How about going back to the Stark Industries building for a drink?" Howard suggested in a good mood. "Just take me back to where Logan is, and bring Fury along next time. There are children here." Kyle gestured to Yutong, who was sitting next to him. "How did you get back?" "I asked you just now, but you didn't tell me," Howard asked in surprise, looking back at the cute and well-behaved Yutong. "You old gentleman, whatever you say is just hooliganism." Kyle shrugged, kneaded Yutong's little head, and said solemnly, "This child is also a person like Logan, with a special mutant ability. At the bottom of the last well in Razang, Tokyo, he could only use his body to block most of the residual power of the nuclear bomb, and there were still blasts and radiation damage attacking Yutong. At that time, the hidden intention ability that Yutong inadvertently burst out was enough to surprise Kyle." Chapter 115. Carl family located in the suburbs of New York, near the edge of Queens. It is far away from the hustle and bustle of the big city, but in return it is comfortable and quiet enough. Surrounded by green forests, a large Western-style manor built in the old days sits on a cleared lot, casting a shifted shadow in the afternoon sun. A helicopter flew directly from Washington to the sky above the manor, humming and blowing up sand and fallen leaves, and slowly landed on the open space in front of the manor. This big noise, of course, had already attracted the attention of the people in the manor. The door opened, and Kyle just got off the back seat of the helicopter with Yutong. With a scream, a beautiful female figure rushed out from the door of the manor and jumped into his arms impatiently. "Kyle, you're finally back." "Lucy," Kyle smiled, a rare, gentle smile on his handsome face. He sniffed the fragrance of the girl's golden hair and hugged her delicate body in his arms. Following the line of sight, Logan, dressed in jeans, also appeared and stood at the entrance of the manor, leaning against the entrance steps of the multi-story building, and lit a cigarette with a smile. "Howard, I'm home. Do you want to come in and sit down?" Kyle turned around and called to Howard, who was sitting in the helicopter cockpit at the back. Howard smiled and declined, saying, "You just came back. Take some time off with your family. I'll come see you in a few days." "No problem." Kyle nodded. There were so many things he and Howard planned to do that there was no rush. The important thing now is to check how well Logan performs in the test mission. Kyle held Lucy's slender waist with one hand and waved with the other hand to signal Yutong to follow him. As they approached the manor building, Logan dodged his gaze, put out his cigarette a little nervously, and went back into the house first. What happened to Logan? Kyle was secretly surprised, but soon he understood what was going on. In the main building of the manor, low-key and luxurious classical lamps are on, and there are all kinds of decorative furniture. There are more than a dozen rooms of different sizes. 3 little girls around 14 years old were cleaning in servants' clothes. When they saw Logan walking in front and Lucy holding Kyle's arm and Yutong walking in, they were about to greet Logan, the owner of the manor. "Wait, this is the owner here." Logan stopped them coldly, waved his hand towards Kyle, and said in a deep voice. The 3 girls were stunned for a moment, looking at Kyle timidly, and then they quickly bowed their heads and saluted, "Hello, Patriarch." "Okay." Kyle smiled and nodded. At this moment, he seemed to be surprised to find something. His eyes turned to a room where the voices of many young children could be faintly heard. Lucy smiled and led Kyle to the door of the room. The room was decorated like a separate classroom, complete with a blackboard, desk, and a teaching table. A man in sunglasses was teaching a security class, and more than 30 children around 8 years old were listening attentively in the audience. Logan stepped forward and said helplessly, "Boss, I will explain this to you." "Explain slowly. I'm actually very curious. When I asked you to adopt 10 children, you kept shirking your responsibility, but now you have taken the initiative to complete the task in excess." Kyle blinked, a little surprised. How did Logan succeed in changing his job so quickly? "Wolverine, where is your pride as a fighter? Have you really become a babysitter?" The second floor of the manor building, the master meeting room. Kyle and Lucy sat on a large sofa with Yutong, while Logan sat alone on the other side and began to report on the mission. Overall, Logan originally followed the mission process and bribed the director of an orphanage to adopt 10 children. Unexpectedly, he discovered that the orphanage staff were abusing the children, so he couldn't help but take action, accidentally killing the staff and demolishing most of the orphanage. Now that the orphanage was gone, Logan took it upon himself to adopt most of the children in the orphanage and brought them back to the manor. He listed 32 children between 8 and 10 years old as those who could be taught and trained. As for the rest, there are 8 children over 10 years old who are responsible for the daily housekeeping of the manor. The orphans from the war are very sensible and obedient, although they are young. Those children over 10 years old who do not meet the age requirements of the mission can also be used to replace the manor's daily housekeeping staff. Logan covered up with a little embarrassment. No matter what, he still violated the mission conditions. "I have no objection. You can't say you did anything wrong." Kyle nodded. 40 children were neither too many nor too few. They were just enough to serve as the bottom-level staff for building the family's power. He paused, looked directly at Logan, and smiled. "Also, I'm very happy that you can finally let go of your excessive defenses and are willing to accept and trust others." Lucy also smiled and said, "Yes, Uncle Logan is very popular among the children here." Logan touched his nose awkwardly. During this period of time, he really experienced another life surrounded by those children. Let's get back to the point. Kyle thought for a moment and asked bluntly, "Logan, what do you think I want you to do by letting you adopt so many orphans?" "The Carl family cultivates talents." Logan responded concisely and forcefully. "That's right. My vision for the Carl family in the future is to be an extraordinary and independent private organization that is not responsible for external crises on Earth and only follows my orders. Kyle said confidently. Why choose an orphan child? Because he has the ability given to the card, blue quality, and above ability cards. Only one can be given to one person. So it doesn't matter whether the subordinates have potential or ability. The most important thing is loyalty. Children are easily brainwashed when they are brought up from a young age, forming a dependence and trust in their family, and then they guard and execute orders from the bottom of their hearts. Otherwise, no matter how strong they are, like the future shield in Kamartaj, they were almost destroyed by the betrayal of internal personnel and almost fell apart. But you're wrong about one thing. What I cultivate are not talents, but heroes. Kyle added that the heroes he mentioned refer to the basic ability qualities of heroes. It is common sense that all heroes in Marvel must have abilities that surpass those of ordinary people. In his future preparations and plans, the lowest level members of the Carl family must at least reach the level of combat power of Black Widow and Hawkeye. Otherwise, you are not worthy of calling yourself a member of the Carl family. Those children downstairs have been trained and grown up. Only those who have passed the test and are qualified can permanently settle in the family's overseas territories. They are only the lowest level card disciples of the Carl family. The few of you present here are the core members of the Carl family. Kyle's eyes fell on Lucy, Logan, and Yutong respectively. Not to mention Lucy, his fiancée, even if she was just an ordinary person with a weaker status, was much higher than the others. Logan and Yutong, both of whom are born with genetic variants, originally have rare blue abilities. If they are given a suitable ability card in the future, they will definitely become the mainstay of the family's power. The standard configuration of the full hero lineup. This is the Carl family. Chapter 116. Target, above God Kyle. Who is this kid? In the host's meeting room, Lucy's beautiful eyes fell on Kyle's right side, where Yutong was sitting calmly and indifferently on the soft sofa. From the moment she entered the house until now, Yutong had never moved away from Kyle, as if she had an instinctive attachment to him. Although Lucy wouldn't be jealous because of a child, she was still surprised by this. In fact, she was not the only one. Even Logan was a little confused. After all, Kyle didn't seem like someone who would take care of a child casually. Logan had just been vaguely observing Yutong, who was sitting opposite him. The sharp beast instinct of the lone wolf gene told him that the cute little girl in a hood and long-sleeve sweater in front of him was far from being as harmless as she looked. Oh, I almost forgot. Kyle suddenly remembered and rubbed Yutong's little head beside him with his hand, saying, Yutong, say hello to Lucy and Logan. My name is Yutong Carl. I'm 8 years old, and I was picked up by the eldest brother in Razang, Tokyo. Yutong's voice was soft, not as pretentious as before, which immediately made Lucy laugh. Kyle, you really know how to pick up. Lucy stuck out her pink tongue and glanced at Kyle unhappily. She seemed to be a pet as well, picked up from the battlefield, etc. Could this also be a child bride? Lucy thought to herself that due to her woman's nature, the way she looked at Yutong changed slightly. I have to say, the other person is really cute, with a petite body, a delicate face, and fair skin. Even she has the urge to hug him like a plush doll. Yutong frowned slightly and moved slightly closer to Kyle's body. As if noticing her abnormality, Kyle asked curiously, What's wrong? She is hostile to me. Yutong looked at Lucy indifferently and said bluntly. After the words were spoken, the conference room fell silent for a moment. Kyle and Logan had strange expressions on their faces, and they looked at Lucy at the same time, which made Lucy blush and cover her beautiful face. She said, I'll go get some drinks, and hurriedly fled the meeting room. Logan reacted quickly, realizing something. He stared at Yutong with his sharp eyes and said solemnly, Boss, can this girl read minds? I can't hear your thoughts, and neither can I, boss. Yutong was angry. This time, she spoke with the buzzing of her brain waves, causing Logan to subconsciously cover his ears. Kyle seemed to have known this long ago. After all, this was still one of the abilities that could be controlled by the mind. From simply controlling the spatial movement of entities, to detaching from reality, to a deeper level of exploration of the thoughts and ideas of living things. This is only effective for normal people with weak willpower, and has no effect on people with extraordinary willpower like him and Logan. Object manipulation, telepathic communication, psychokinesis barrier, mind reading. This is the ability of mind manipulation under enhanced mental power. Logan. This kid is the same kind of person as you. I simply call him a mutant, Kyle said with a smile. The current world is not like the large-scale genetic mutations in the X-Men universe, and there is no relevant information about mutants, so he decided to give this definition. Boss, aren't you a mutant too? Logan asked curiously. He always thought that Kyle and he were the same kind. I do have abilities that far exceed those of humans, but there is a fundamental difference between me and the two of you. Kyle explained, you two are born with genetic mutations, which means you have the same racial talents. You are born with special super abilities. After natural growth, your talents will be triggered by some stimulation during childhood. Some of these innate genetic instincts are similar to your claws and self-healing, Logan, or Yutong's mind manipulation. Some people can even race against the speed of light and time, and can control metal, water, and fire. Kelton paused, then continued, but I am different. Originally, I did not have any congenital genetic mutations, and when I was a child, I was not much different from other normal people. Later, after the military researched the super soldier drug, I acquired the perfect human physique through genetic modification. This kind of talent acquired through various drugs and radiation is what I call a mutant. His super soldier ability card was copied from Steve, so he skipped the process of injecting the super soldier potion. So that's how it is? Logan nodded thoughtfully. In his life of more than half a century, this was the first time he heard of such a novel classification of abilities. Mutants are equivalent to the second evolution of the human species, similar to the difference between apes and modern humans. Mutations are coincidental, breaking the original genetic framework and standing on the same starting line as mutants. Kyle couldn't help but sigh when he said this. Whether mutants or mutations, they are all lonely supermen walking at the forefront of human evolution history. I call them evolvers. Some races of gods in this Marvel world are omnipotent, and their rainbow bridge spans the universe and the stars. But weren't they also weak creatures similar to primitive humans in the beginning? Through continuous racial evolution, they mastered talents such as thunder and divine power, and then stabilized the altar and built the divine domain. Gods are nothing more than a top race, standing at the forefront of the evolution of species in the universe. With this in mind, it becomes obvious why Hulk will be able to rub gods to the ground in the future. If we can continue to evolve and become stronger, and arm ourselves with high technology, perhaps the gods' realm in the future can be replaced by our family. Kyle's words were so earth-shattering that the usually calm Logan trembled all over. Logan smiled bitterly and said, Boss, it's still unclear whether there are gods in this world. There may be no other life in the universe outside the Earth. You have never been outside the Earth, so how do you know there are no other alien races? Maybe there is a galactic alliance or a divine realm where gods live. Kyle smiled and didn't reveal more. The people on Earth are still frogs in the well of cognition, but he, who is transformed into an eagle in the sky, has long left the well frame and is looking far into the distance at the sea and stars outside. One day, you will understand what I mean by these words. Kyle's thoughts returned to reality, and he said, Let's make the initial plan for the Carl family first. In a couple of days, I will go out with Howard and take him to a turtle-shaped island in the Atlantic Ocean to investigate and develop an exclusive base for the family's power. Then I will continue to stay here. Logan scratched his head. Has he really become a babysitter? You can start teaching the children here combat courses, Kyle pondered, his eyes shining with cold light, and said, After I come back, you and Yutong, the three of us will go to the Soviet Union. Soviet Union? Yes, the Soviet Union. Kyle smiled. He had not forgotten some of the little tricks behind the Red Room, the Soviet agent training base, during the war. Since there is a debt, it must be settled as soon as possible, and the debt must be collected at the door. Chapter 117, Symbol of Peace. It was morning, and the gentle sunlight shone into the forest, dispersing the white mist and creating a blur of light and shadow. Kyle was wearing long-sleeve casual clothes and sunglasses, lying comfortably on a sun lounger on the lawn of the manor to bask in the sun. Venom himself also lay on the grass beside the chair, rolling back and forth restlessly on the grass. 3 days have passed since I returned to New York. Without the identity of a war hero and a general, away from the chaos and killing of war, my leisure time has been comfortable and long. Venom, do you feel that there are slight changes in my body? Kyle frowned and muttered to himself. The change in his middle finger was not due to his relaxed and lazy state of mind, but the perfect physique that was now at the peak of a super soldier. This feeling of change began to emerge after Risen Tokyo withstood the aftermath of the nuclear explosion. When living in symbiosis with the Venom, this change is not felt too strongly. Once separated from the Venom, one can slightly feel the potential changes taking place inside the body. In the card space, he carefully sorted out the ability cards that changed his physical condition, focusing on super soldier and self-healing factor. But he did not find the potential reason for the change. Is it the radiation from the nuclear explosion that affected the originally stable genetic structure in my body? Kyle thought to himself that this change was too slight for his body, and he couldn't tell whether it was good or bad. At this moment, an extended black and gold luxury car drove out from the road opened in the forest and stopped in front of the open space in front of the manor building. 2 bodyguards in suits got out of the car in advance, opened the door respectfully, and let Lucy and Yutong get out, and then they began to move the supplies from the trunk. The forest where the manor is located is still some distance away from the town, and purchasing supplies often requires driving 5 kilometers away. The cars and bodyguards were all recruited and arranged by Howard in advance. Kyle was convinced that Howard, the old gentleman, was methodical in his work. After going through so much, the 2 of them were now the closest of partners in life and work. Kyle were back. Lucy, wearing a sun hat, waved towards the lawn to greet them, holding the hand of Yutong, who was a few sizes shorter than her. Somehow, the 2 of them had overcome their age difference and become good friends in the past few days. People with the ability to read minds are naturally feared and awed by children of the same age. However, with Yutong as a real potential bodyguard, Kyle feels more at ease about Lucy's going out. A rolled-up black and white newspaper floated up from the bag Lucy was holding, flew over like a bird, and landed on the small table next to Kyle. "Boss, today's newspaper," Yutong said via telepathy. Kyle, who was still lying down, nodded, picked up the newspaper, and quickly flipped through it. He read 10 lines at a glance and threw it on the table. The main content on the front page of the New York Times is exactly the same as in the past 2 days, all of which are reports centered around him. Stark Industries will hold the World Technology Expo a few months early, and the reports on the release of new products that will change the world will be pitifully squeezed to the second page. The news about the return of war heroes, the remnants of the terrorist organization Hydra lurking in the upper echelons of the American empire, the confrontation between the country's top regime and civilian superheroes, the youngest major general applying for retirement and resigning from his post, the new president replacing officials and officers for Kyle, etc., was bombarded all over the American mainland day and night. The war hero retired, and the symbol of national conquest and power was no longer there. The media collectively gave Kyle another name, symbol of peace. When Kyle heard this new name the day before yesterday, he was stunned and almost spit out the red wine he was drinking. How can he, a warmonger, become a symbol of peace? The problem is that the general public also agrees with this title, which is much more recognized than the previous devil, killer god, tyrant, etc. Some people have raised funds to build peace symbol sculptures in some squares, and the Norwegian parliament is also discussing voting for him to receive this year's Nobel Peace Prize. This has reached the point where Kyle himself can no longer complain. But no matter what, since he decided to build his family power, he planned to fade out of the public's attention and patiently prepare for future alien invasions. Kyle now does not dare to claim to be invincible even on Earth. Many mysterious organizations, large and small, are hidden in corners of the world, not to mention the vast alien universe outside the Earth. The most reliable thing I have now, besides the card drawing ability, is the preparation time that is decades longer than other heroes, and knowing the major plot events that will happen in the future in advance. This is my greatest reliance as a time traveler. In just 1 year, I have reached the highest level of a super soldier, standing at the pinnacle of human fame and prestige on Earth, with endless wealth that rivals that of a country. After a few decades, where will the Carl family and I end up? Even I can't predict it, Kyle thought to himself, with enough confidence and courage in his heart. God is very powerful? Wait for me to climb up step by step. Thanos' Infinity Gauntlet set is unsolvable? Is there any suggestion to let him slowly collect 6 gems? By taking the initiative to prepare for the trump card, Kyle will be invincible by nature and act as a bigger boss behind the scenes, deducing and controlling everything. Now, at this moment, is the first step. Kyle sat up from the sun lounger. A tall bodyguard in a suit came to the edge of the lawn and bowed his head respectfully and said, "Mr. Kyle, the boss said he has flown a plane to pick you up to go out to sea." "Okay, tell Lucy that lunch doesn't have to wait for me," Kyle ordered. After the bodyguards withdrew, he glanced at Venom, who was jumping excitedly beside him. "Are you going or not?" "Rolling." The black liquid form of Venom originally bounced up and transformed into a hooded jacket that was draped over Kyle. An hour and a half later, off the vast Atlantic Ocean, under the bright sunshine at noon, a helicopter spiraled and hummed, maintaining an altitude of hundreds of meters. "Kyle, are we really approaching that turtle-shaped island you mentioned?" Howard asked in surprise while sitting in the driver's seat. Kyle, who was in the co-pilot's seat, looked down at the sea and nodded, saying, "Yeah, about the same. You must have remembered it wrongly. There are no islands shown on the map in the nearby waters." Howard confirmed. "You'll know in a moment." Kyle smiled mysteriously. When the helicopter flew another 10 miles offshore, he had figured it out and said to Howard, "Next, follow the process I tell you to do." "No problem." Howard nodded. He didn't believe that Kyle could create an island out of thin air. "Now you give me this helicopter," Kyle said inexplicably. "Ah." Howard was stunned for a moment, then quickly agreed. "No problem. I'll give it to you if you want it. I'll build another one later." "Then, the ownership of this helicopter belongs to me now," Kyle pondered, and seeing that the helicopter card information was still in an unremovable state, he continued, "Unfasten your seatbelt and stop driving the helicopter." Chapter 118, Subverting Howard's 3 Views Regarding the Extraction of Item Cards. The extraction time is much faster than that of ability cards, but at the same time, the extraction restrictions are becoming more stringent. For example, sand, paper scraps, stones. These items cannot be extracted. However, a box of sand with gold dust, paper with craft design drawings, stone carved by a master, etc., can be included in the category of item card extraction. What is important here is the measurement of the value of the items. Special items such as out-of-control fighter planes, severely damaged firearms, unstable energy sources, grenades, and nuclear bombs that are about to explode cannot be extracted either. In addition, it must not be someone else's personal property. This is the primary condition for item extraction. Hurry up. At Kyle's urging, Howard, who was originally hesitant, made up his mind, unbuckled his seatbelt quickly, moved his hands and feet from the driver's seat, and moved his whole body to the passenger seat. The helicopter vibrated slightly with a hum and began to glide downward. Howard turned pale with fright and quickly grabbed the internal fuselage with both hands. "Oh my God, Kyle, what did you do to the helicopter? Why is it gone?" He waved his hand, and several item cards fell on the speedboat deck, materializing into sun chairs, sun umbrellas, round tables, red wine. "Why?" Howard frowned. "The card information has not changed, and it is still not extractable." Over half a century, he mastered the anti-gravity suspension technology. He studied Tesseract and obtained the element structure diagram of new energy. This is really like the temptation from the devil in a fairy tale. Howard fell into deep thought and asked calmly, "What price do I need to pay?" Such scientific and technological talents are definitely not much worse than the future Iron Man Tony. The only difference is that they were born in the wrong era. "Done." Kyle smiled. In his eyes, the rare green, modified helicopter changed from being unrecoverable to being recoverable. Kyle wants to help Howard subvert and break the shackles of the old-fashioned concept and make him the biggest help in providing advanced high technology. This phenomenon could not be explained by science at all. No matter how hard his brain worked, he could not come up with an answer in time. Moreover, the current thrilling situation made it difficult for Howard to maintain his gentlemanly image, and he screamed. Kyle slowly landed on the deck, stood firmly, and let go of Howard. Howard held the railing of the speedboat with his soft legs and gasped for breath. Kyle lifted Howard's body and used Venom's gliding ability to slow down and keep him in the air. When he was 5 meters above the sea, he pulled out an item card and threw it down, which materialized into a modern speedboat. If you can really do that, I will give you the entire Stark Industries under my name, even at any price. As long as I can continue to research new scientific products and explore scientific truths in the future. That's enough. What happened? Howard was still confused. Just 3 seconds later, the helicopter turned from real to virtual and disappeared out of thin air. The two people inside fell towards the vast ocean from a height of hundreds of meters. I want to take you out of the framework of the well on Earth today and subvert everything. This is one of my abilities. It allows me to store items in another dimension and retrieve them for use at any time. Kyle explained without hiding anything. Howard Stark? Kyle looked Howard straight in the eye and said straight to the point. I can give you a long enough life, and my family will protect you from harm throughout your life. I will let you see the city of the future, the scenery of the Earth in the next century, and the technological beauty of the alien universe. Dos más. Dos. I believe you. You are constantly creating miracles and subverting other people's imaginations. Your vision and experience often surprise me. If there is a God, I believe he will be surprised by you. Howard laughed. After a long while, Howard finally calmed down. He still stared at Kyle in disbelief and asked, "How did you do that just now?" The other person is one of the few people in this world whom he can treat sincerely as a friend. He did not intend to erase this meaning by force. This is yours. Howard drank a glass first to calm down, then poured a glass for Kyle, looked at him, and asked seriously, "Kyle, tell me the truth. Are you a god or an alien?" Howard was in a natural fall and was stunned. The gentleman's hat on his head had been thrown away by the strong wind, and the mustache on his face was blown askew. He could only spread his limbs weakly and fell towards the sea in a big shape. Kyle smiled and said something that made Howard uneasy. "It doesn't cost anything. Is it still not enough?" Kyle pondered, stood up, and reached out to turn off the plane engine. "Because the road I want to take is too lonely and long. Using tricks to win people over is not really my style. If you can use scientific resources and always walk by my side, that would be enough to make me feel gratified." Kyle spread his hands and said boringly, "Of course I am just a human above ordinary people." Kyle chuckled, picked up his wine glass, took a sip of red wine, and said meaningfully, "But the future is hard to say. I will become a god, standing above all gods. Do you believe it?" Howard shuddered when he heard this, and then he said with a sigh, "Kyle, I just said something wrong. It's the occupational disease of a businessman who cares too much about gains and losses. This is not scientific at all." Watching this magical scene that seemed like a magic trick, Howard couldn't help but smile bitterly. But he sat down on the sun lounger without hesitation, opened the red wine, and poured himself half a glass. Howard is now one of the world's top scientific engineers with advanced ideas. But in Kyle's opinion, the technological level and rigid concepts of the old era have bound this noble soul burdened by knowledge. I never said this is science. In fact, there are many things in this world that cannot be explained by science. In the future, you may see gods flying in the sky, magic that makes people's souls leave their bodies, and even travel across the universe and go back in time. Kyle shrugged. He did these actions not to show off, but to help Howard break the outdated conceptual framework of this era. "Calm down, you have nothing to fear with me here." Beside Howard, who was screaming, Kyle also fell down and said calmly, "If you want to follow me, then from now on, throw away all your previous values and ideas." This is the true words of Howard, a mad scientist. And it is also the lifelong dream of every scientist that is to constantly explore and seek the truth of world science. As they were talking, the two of them were already falling close to the sea surface. Kyle suddenly reached out and grabbed Howard's suit jacket and the hooded leather jacket spread out its dark red wings. Chapter 119, Summoning the Dragon. Turtle Kyle and Howard both have their own opinions and ideas, and they are decisive and action-oriented. Sometimes a simple decision of commitment can surpass thousands of things and priceless treasures in this world. After this incident, Howard had tied himself to Kyle's ship. If Kyle sank, he would be doomed, and if Kyle floated, he would take off into the sky as well. Stark Industries, a future billion-dollar enterprise empire covering a range of industries, including military weapons, high-end technology, and biomedicine, was handed over to the Chinese government. Kyle didn't take Stark Industries seriously at all. The only thing he had his eyes on was Howard, a top talent. However, he would like to see this opportunity allow Howard to get rid of his official identity as a business owner and officially become a full-time scientific logistics researcher. Stark Industries will be secretly owned by the Carl family. You can find someone you trust to manage it on your behalf. Whenever you feel tired as a researcher, you can always be the boss again. Kyle looked directly at Howard and said sincerely, I will provide you with a big enough stage and resources to let you show your talents and peek into the truth of science and technology. It's settled. Howard nodded solemnly, knowing that he was crossing the door of opportunity and choosing a path that deviated from his original life trajectory. In that case, let's toast to our further in-depth cooperation. Kyle smiled and raised the wine glass, which was half filled with red wine. Howard quickly picked up the bottle and poured it into his own glass, clinking their glasses. Boss, I should be the one toasting you. Howard shrugged and drank the red wine in the glass first. The last time the two had their initial discussion about cooperation was at a dance hall bar in Europe, where they discussed a cooperation project for 40% of Stark Industries shares. This time, the two talked about cooperation for the second time on a speedboat anchored somewhere in the Atlantic Ocean, and talked about the entire Stark Industries ownership and the future of Howard himself. Didn't you just say that there is no island on the map? Kyle finished his drink, put down the glass in his hand, blinked, and said to Howard, if there are any things that subvert reality in the future, reveal them all at once. Don't hide them. It's scary. Howard said with a wry smile, your existence is the greatest miracle. Now, even if you just turn an island into something, I can accept it. That's what you said. So it's as you wish. Kyle said, walking to the edge of the speedboat deck and looking at the vast, sparkling sea. His mind fell into the card space, and he drew the purple creature card that had been stored at the highest point of the creature area. It was also the only purple quality card he had. Super large ancient dragon turtle, current status. This area meets the summoning conditions. Do you want to summon? Confirm the call. Kyle muttered to himself. The next moment, Howard on the speedboat, as well as Kyle himself, all widened their eyes at the same time. In front of the speedboat, a huge beast suddenly appeared in the low sky. The width, length, and height of its body were so endless that the moment it appeared, the large sea area in front of the two people for several miles was shrouded in the shadow of the beast. The giant beast looks like an alligator snapping turtle with a brown body. Its biggest feature is that it is huge. It is so huge. Among the known creatures on Earth, the giant whale can only barely match half the size of its hand. The tortoise shell on its back was completely covered with solidified reefs and grass, piled up into forests and peaks, as if it was carrying a giant island. Oh my God! Howard opened his mouth in horror, staring at the giant beast summoned by Kyle, gasping for breath and shaking all over. Compared to such creatures, humans are so tiny that they are not even as big as ants. Kyle was also frightened. In fact, this was his first time summoning an ancient dragon turtle, and the biological entity was far more shocking and frightening than what was described in the card information. It's a purple creature card indeed. Very impressive. But soon, Kyle lost his admiration, because when the giant turtle body floating in the low sky was completely summoned, it let out a cry, and its huge mountain-like body fell heavily to the sea below. Kyle, tell me this isn't true. Howard was still in a daze, and Kyle next to him grabbed his arm, quickly performed an air sprint, and rushed into the sky with a burst of energy tide. Immediately afterwards, the body of the ancient giant turtle fell into the sea. Under its heavy weight of tens of thousands of tons, the surrounding sea surface was violently slapped, and waves tens of meters high were raised in all directions. The modern speedboat that was still anchored on the original sea surface rolled and floated like a leaf in the turbulent sea water. And soon, even the wreckage disappeared. Kyle held Howard's arm and hovered in the air with his wings gliding, splashing water all over them. When the waves subsided, the lower half of the ancient giant turtle sank into the sea, with only the shell exposed above the sea surface, so it really looked like a turtle-shaped island. Howard, wearing a wet gentleman's suit, spat out the salty seawater from his mouth and hesitantly said, "Is this the turtle-shaped, deserted island you mentioned? This is clearly the largest giant turtle monster in history. If it is exposed, it will probably attract crazy research from scientists around the world." Almost. As far as I'm concerned, it's not much different from a normal island, except that I can move freely on the sea, Kyle said, gliding forward and landing, taking Howard into the interior of the island. "You mean you tamed this giant turtle?" Howard asked in surprise. "Yes, it will only obey me." Kyle nodded. "The biggest advantage of the creature card is that it can summon creatures to obey you compulsorily. It's controllable, so we can indeed treat it as a movable island." Howard pondered and began to trek into the forest of the island. He and Kyle went out to sea today with the purpose of conducting a preliminary survey of the island, and then starting the planning and design of the base. The wide area on the back of the dragon turtle contains mountains, forests, lakes, and streams. If Howard had not known the true appearance of the underlying area, he would undoubtedly have mistaken it for a normal island. Kyle and Howard wandered around the island and finally reached the top of the island's mountain range. Looking down, they could clearly see the entire back of the island's appearance. "This is the base. You can make it as big as you want." Howard sighed and expressed his inner worries. But its existence may be too conspicuous. Maybe satellites or ships can see it in the future. "I've thought of this too. Don't worry, I'll take care of it once the base is ready." Kyle replied. Did he know that Wakanda possessed the technological know-how of a hidden country, a city of the future? When it comes to the creation of new elements, leaping beyond the limitations of current technology, one cannot avoid that barbaric yet advanced place. Chapter 120. A showdown across the century, the super-large ancient dragon turtle stayed in the deep Atlantic Ocean and fell into a long-term hibernation, completely turning into an island. Kyle and Howard, who had measured and drawn the preliminary design of the base, returned to their New York estate by helicopter just as night fell. When the helicopter landed in the open space in front of the manor, Kyle walked out of the cabin. Just then, a military jeep drove up the forest road. The two beams of light in front of the car shone brightly on him. Who had come to visit at this late hour? Under Kyle's surprised gaze, the jeep stopped in the open space next to the helicopter, and a one-eyed, dark-skinned, bald young man who was almost invisible at night got out first. He was covered in a windbreaker, looking dusty and smiling, revealing a row of clean white teeth. Fury. Kyle shook his head and laughed. It turned out to be this guy. Fury had been pestering Howard for the past few days, but he finally got the location of the manor where he was living in seclusion. "Kyle, I haven't seen you for a few days." Fury walked over here with a smile, but soon he gritted his teeth and turned stern. He changed the subject and said angrily, "You feel relieved after retiring. Do you know how much trouble I have to take on for you? Those who are capable should do more work. This is a stage for you to showcase your talents." Kyle blinked and patted Fury's shoulder soothingly. "Don't give me that. Anyway, you must give me extra salary this time." Fury glared at Kyle. Kyle didn't know whether to laugh or cry, and nodded in agreement. "No problem. I'll give you double your salary. Plus, you'll be recognized as an outstanding employee. Look who I brought here." Fury smiled and moved his body away. A middle-aged, sturdy, and strong officer stepped forward to the jeep parked behind him. "Joseph." Kyle smiled, hugged the big man, and patted his back with a little force. Joseph and Fury were both friends who had given him great help during World War II, and they were also military personnel with whom he still kept in touch. "Fury and I resigned, but you got promoted." Kyle joked. Just as Logan was about to attack, Yutong suddenly stopped him in a soft voice. "Wait a minute." This scene made the children nearby scream out in surprise. "You've all come all the way here. why don't you go inside and sit down? Kyle suggested, looking at Howard, Fury, and Joseph respectively. Tonight it was all old acquaintances gathered together. Oh, a fight broke out? Kyle was surprised when he heard it, and the venom on his body that had turned into leather clothes also became restless and excited. Logan growled, raised the sharp claws on both hands, and rushed forward with a kick backwards. His means of attack was undoubtedly the strong and inhuman beast body and a pair of bone claws as sharp as knives. That was his long-gone youth. Under the illumination of the retro lamp posts around, Lucy and 30 or 40 other children sat on the grass in a circle. This was the competition venue that the Manor family had been paying attention to. The boss said, "You are a warrior and I am a mage, so when we compete and fight, we need to keep a certain distance between us," Yutong said, and stopped only when she was 10 meters away from Logan. Yutong imitated Kyle's usual movements and waved her little hand lightly. Murasame, who was half a head taller than her and was carried diagonally behind her, broke away from the leather scabbard under her mind control and floated above her head, flashing a cold light. What a hassle! Logan was a little annoyed. He looked at Murasame, who was knocked away by him, and then entangled with him again. He glanced at Yutong, who was 5 meters ahead. Wolf King, red eyes. Fury nodded in agreement and smiled at Joseph. "I told you, Kyle will not agree to return to the military." As Logan accelerated and approached, Yutong looked at him seriously and cast her Superman power on Murasame floating above her head, who immediately flew across the night sky at high speed with a whoosh. Ding ding according to age. This was undoubtedly a cross-century showdown between an old man in his 60s and a baby in his 50s. At this moment, he suddenly understood what Kyle meant by the distinction between warriors and mages. Huh? Logan wondered, looking up and seeing Yutong's calves moving backwards, taking several steps back. "I'm going to take action." Logan gave a verbal warning, crossing his hands in front of his chest, with 3 white bone claws extending from the ends of his fists. He said that if you are willing to come back, he will apply for the position of 5-star general for you. Joseph.
No more novels? Take part in the voting. The most requested novels and those with the most likes will be chosen for publication on euroaudiobooks.com. There, I can upload as much as I want without the risk of receiving a strike. Our 18 novels and other content that exceed what is morally acceptable are only published on Patreon or the free novels page. Remember, the site is funded by donations on Ko-fi and Patreon memberships.